All right, so we are right on time. It's 2 p.m. in Bangkok, 7 a.m. I believe in the UK, and 8 a.m. in Vienna. Good morning, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to this webinar on digitalization against corruption, organized by the UN Office on Drug and Crime in cooperation with the UK Government Digital Services, Open Ownership, Open Contracting Partnership, and supported by the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office of the United Kingdom. My name is Francesco Checchi. I am the Regional Anti-Corruption Advisor of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime here in Bangkok, and I'm covering the Southeast Asia region, and I'm moderating the session today. The webinar is the second of a series of regional discussion on how to promote the fight against corruption in Asia-Pacific region and beyond. So what role digital data play or should play in government policies against corruption, as well as in civil society efforts? How do we harness the power of data? Which are the preconditions for data to be utilized properly? What are the possibilities in the anti-corruption area, and which challenges are government facing to make digitalization really work against corruption? So these are the questions we're going to answer today with a series of national and international experts. Let me set a couple of ground rules for the webinar. So please make sure your microphone is muted if you're not speaking. Raise your hand if you would like to take the floor. Please feel free to do so. You can see the hand button on the top of your screen slightly to the right. Or feel free to send us a message in the chat box. There will be a couple of Q&A times during the webinar where we will try to address the question that you will post in the chat box. Now, so to open this webinar, we're really glad and honored to have here Mr. John Penrose. He is a member of Parliament in the United Kingdom, and he is the Prime Minister Anti-Corruption Champion, responsible for coordinating the UK response to corruption and for the implementation of the first UK anti-corruption strategy. He was previously Minister of State for Northern Ireland from 2018 to 2019. He also had a successful career in the private sector, so I guess he is really well placed to speak on this topic. So thank you really very much for joining us, Mr. Penrose, and for waking up early and being with us today. So please, I would like to give you the floor for your welcoming address. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francesco. And I should start with an apology to everybody on the call because I have this slightly ghostly light effect here in London. And the simple reason is that at 7 a.m. in late November in London, the sun is not yet up. So while the world is getting underway and businesses are starting to work, the sun is still lagging behind us. And I'm sorry for the slightly weird effects, but congratulations, firstly, Francesco, to you and to all your sponsors and partners for arranging this. And it just shows, here we are on a digital call in at least 3 different time zones, straddling the globe. And if you wanted a clear explanation, in fact, a demonstration of the power of digital in all parts of our life, not just in the fight against corruption, the fact that we are now all of us Zoom and Microsoft Team experts and entirely used to this, whereas a matter of months ago, certainly at the start of this year, before the pandemic struck, this was something which would have seemed like fantasy to most of us. And yet here we are a few months later, and you described the sort of the running order and how to use Teams, but that's not because people don't understand how to use the various platforms anymore. We're all very, very familiar with them, but because we're still working out, and different countries and different organizations have different approaches to how you interact on a large scale between people on one of these platforms. And so you were rightly explaining how this particular one is going to do and whether or not to raise your hand in it like this or to use the button or whatever it might be. And I think that just shows the journey we've all come on and the power of digitalization in every walk of life. And that is why it's particularly important for the fight against corruption. I always like to remember that the famous American gangster Al Capone, when he was eventually caught and jailed by the US authorities, wasn't jailed for being wasn't jailed for murder or anything like that. He was eventually jailed for tax fraud. And the reason why he was jailed for tax fraud was because there was an audit trail. And they were able to follow the money, and they were able to show that he had broken those laws, even though he was able to suborn or avoid justice for many of the other, in many cases, far more dreadful crimes that he had committed. And the advantage of digitalization for all of us, I think, is that it has brought the possibility, the probability, the facility to create an audit trail and create not just a private official audit trail which investigators in our law enforcement agencies can follow, but also a public audit trail which increasingly civil society and what people call the town square can follow as well. And that just creates the most enormous opportunity for us all. And the thing which I suppose the pandemic has both given us as an opportunity, but also cruelly exposed, is firstly just how far we've come. I just started by saying, we're all behaving in a way now which would have been extraordinary 10 months ago. And this, on events like this and many others, it just shows the power of digitalization and what we can do. And it has given this enormous push forward to trends that were already happening, but it's speeded some of them up enormously so that we are all now much more digital than we were at the start of the year. But it's also cruelly exposed just how far we all still have to go in realizing the opportunities which digitalization can provide for us. And my own country is no different. I'm sure we are all at different stages in this journey, but none of us, I think, can yet fairly claim that we are, we've reached the top of this mountain, that we are using all the opportunities which the digital world can provide. In fact, most of us think the more we learn and the more we do, the more excited, but also the more daunting the remaining journey that is still to be traveled becomes. And that's because the possibilities of this of technology in creating audit trails, in exposing corruption, and in some cases things which aren't corruption are just core value, and where there's an opportunity to extract far better value for state actors, for taxpayers, just in normal commerce, in the normal activities of the state, even when there's no hint of corruption and you're just doing the job reasonably well, but you could be doing it so much better. All of us could be doing it so much better just by getting more people to bid on public contracts, to be able to compare the value more accurately of what they're offering, to be able to evaluate new opportunities for doing things slightly differently using new technologies. All those things have just moved forward at light speed over the course of the last few months, but also exposed just how much further we have to go. To give you an example from my own country, we are in the process of re-examining how we do government buying, government procurement. And we have an opportunity, because we're leaving the European Union, to reorganize all our procurement rules, all our buying rules. And what is becoming clear is that the EU rules which we've been following for years are good in many respects, but we can do so much better. We can move faster, we can be more accurate, we can get better value, and we can design out not just opportunities for organized criminals to corrupt the process, we can also design in opportunities just to get far better value for taxpayers' money and make our available money go further. And I think for all of us will be facing this challenge, that the pandemic will not only have exposed cruelly flaws in how we do things and created opportunities for corrupt people to prosper in ways that no one ever guessed at before the pandemic struck. But it will also, I think, create huge opportunities, because we are all going to need to launch economic recovery plans, and I hope in the not too distant future now, when the vaccines start to be rolled out and we all try to get back to normal, we're all going to want to create an economic boost in order to regain lost ground. Now that economic boost can work much faster and much more efficiently with digitalization, but we should be under no illusions as well that if we stop sloshing money around in the fight against the pandemic in order to save lives medically, which has created opportunities for corruption through medical procurement and all sorts of other things, the opportunity for organized criminals in a world where we're all trying to launch economic regeneration packages will be equally as criminally exciting for them, and have different but equally big flaws and opportunities for us, which we will need to make sure that we are guarding against, so that we aren't wasting a different kind of money or allowing people to corrupt and siphon off economic regeneration money as well. So Francesco, that is why I'm so excited about the opportunity, but I'm also, I think all of us are ruefully saying, my goodness me, if we could have done 10 months ago a fraction of some of the digital things that we are able to do now, then we would have done the last 10 months better and differently, because hindsight is a wonderful thing. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is, yes, it's a wonderful thing, but we have all learned so much, and there are so many more lessons and so many more opportunities for all of us to take using this digital opportunity. So thank you very much for inviting me. I'm so pleased that this is happening. I'm so pleased that it is global and world straddling as we're all on this call today. And I'm delighted to be here. Francesco, thank you very much. And I'm going to do something unusual for our politician and stop talking and listen to what other people have to say. But thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Mr. Penrose, for giving us an overview of what's also going on with digitalization in the UK and the challenges you're facing. But as you say, rightfully, the possibility we have in front of us, which are really, really very great. So thank you so much. And now I would like to give the floor to Giovanni Gallo. Giovanni is the chief of the implementation support section of the corruption and economic crime branch at UNODC. This is actually the section that is responsible for supporting the implementation of the UN Convention Against Corruption. He is a lawyer by training. Over 20 years, Giovanni has held several positions in the UN system, both at HQ and in the field. Among these, he served as senior legal advisor to the Director General of the UN office in Vienna and executive director of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. So Giovanni is also very well placed to speak on this topic. So Giovanni, please, the floor is yours for your welcoming remark. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Francesco, and distinguished representative from government agencies across Southeast Asia, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome from Vienna, Austria, pretty much like in the UK. We are a number of hours behind you. It's 6 o'clock, but I am really pleased to be here with you today to have this opportunity. I would like to start by thanking John Penrose, the United Kingdom Prime Minister's anti-corruption champion, for participating in this webinar at this early hour of the day and for his insightful remarks. I would like to thank the UK government as a whole for supporting the anti-corruption work of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime in Southeast Asia and beyond. We all know that the United Nations is not in the business of ranking countries, and we will not do so, but it is factual and in the public domain that the UK is donor #1 to the anti-corruption work of UNODC globally. And we're truly grateful for the trust and the political and financial support. Support that in recent years has allowed us to develop anti-corruption cooperation platforms in 4 regions of the world. Southeast Asia is one, There is Eastern Africa, Southern Africa, and South America. Through these platforms, and today's webinar is a manifestation of that approach, we have engaged government officials, non-governmental organizations, and the private sector in constructive dialogues and in the provision of peer-to-peer technical cooperation. The platform model is recent for us and is probably one of our most successful programs because it allows us to reach a wide range of stakeholders and drive support for anti-corruption reform. Of course, I also wish to thank the partners of today's webinar, the UK Government Digital Service, Open Contracting Partnership, and Open Ownership. A special thanks to the speakers of the day who have accepted to share information on their initiatives and views on a challenging subject, which is cutting edge for governance and anti-corruption policy in many countries. And finally, a warm welcome to all of you, all those who are joining this webinar, representing government and non-governmental entities from Southeast Asia and beyond. The topic of today's webinar is very dear to all of us. The potential of innovation, of innovative tools and data analytics, not only to fight corruption, but to promote transparency and good governance, which are fundamental to achieve new levels of prosperity and realize the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, the states parties to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption have already emphasized the need to utilize innovation and technology to fight corruption in several occasions. The Conference of the States Parties to the Convention, already in 2015, adopted a resolution on promoting the use of information and communication technology for the implementation of the UN Convention Against Corruption. But most recently, in a resolution of December 2019, the conference called upon states parties to make use of innovative and digital instruments to promote transparency and prevent conflicts of interest. When I mention the Conference of the States Parties, of course, it's common knowledge to all of you. We talk about the body of the 197 governments around the world who have chosen to ratify the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. 187 out of the 193 member states of the United Nations. So the ratification level is almost universal. And tangible progress has been made in the area of innovation and digital technology. The Working Group on the Prevention of Corruption, which is a subsidiary body of the conference that I mentioned before, met virtually in September this year. And on that occasion, several governments presented examples of technology utilized to enhance the effectiveness of anti-corruption bodies and anti-corruption efforts, including in their responses to the COVID-19. Such examples included the automatization of services, online asset disclosure, e-procurement, data mining and analytics, online whistleblowing mechanisms for citizens to report on fraud and corruption. And there is indeed a great variety of ways in which the systematic collection, analysis, and publication of data in electronic format can help the fight against corruption. The identification of public tendering tainted by corruption or conflict of interest, the simplification of financial and anti-money laundering investigations, or the engagement of citizens to highlight embezzlement, mismanagement of public funds. When it comes to the power of technology, Southeast Asia holds incredible potential. More than half of the region's population is under the age of 30, hence born in the internet era. This year, despite the spread of COVID-19, the number of tech startups in Southeast Asia has continued to climb as levels of internet penetration reach new heights. More and more people are living and working online than ever before. And that was mentioned before, a phenomenon that has only been accelerated by the pandemic. But COVID-19 has also exacerbated the risks of corruption. UNODC research shows that public health contracts for medical products have become highly vulnerable to corruption. The urgency to respond to COVID-19 saw somewhere, but consistently, the relaxation of due diligence checks alongside a sharp increase in public spending. And this is a dangerous combination. Simplified procurement rules, such as direct contracting or single source awards, have increased the risk that bribery is used to win public contracts. At the same time, the lack of transparency around money flows in Southeast Asia and beyond has made proceeds of corruption very difficult to trace. UNODC studies indicate that in Southeast Asia, the majority of government agencies involved in anti-corruption do not yet have the capacity, infrastructure, or policies to fully embrace a digitalized response to corruption and fraud. And this is a missed opportunity for the moment, and increasingly so if we consider the growing volumes of data that can be collected through electronic devices. The way forward to harness the power of data analytics for anti-corruption is complex. It requires upgrading infrastructures for data collection, increasing individual capacity to develop and operate IT tools, and developing the appropriate procedures within public administrations. UNODC stands ready, of course, to support its counterparts in the region as they double their efforts in this field. We are confident that digitalization and artificial intelligence solutions will be increasingly central to anti-corruption policies and initiatives around the world. For these reasons, today's webinar is very important and very timely. I wish you all a very productive discussion and success in your anti-corruption efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giovanni, also for your words, for highlighting a bit also the discussion in the United Nations conference of the state party of the UN Convention Against Corruption, and highlighting the possibilities and the challenges for digitalization around the world. Now, I would like to see, maybe there are some quick questions or feedbacks on what has been said so far. I don't see any hands. If you have any remark or anything you would like to say to our honorable and esteemed speakers so far. I don't see hands. Probably people are a bit shy, but let's go ahead for now with the webinar. And thank you again, Giovanni. Thank you, Mr. Penrose, for your welcoming remarks. So now I would like to start with session 1 on data analytics for good governance and the fight against corruption. We have 3 distinguished speakers, and I would like to start with Warren Smith. Warren, can you confirm that you are here?
I am indeed here. Thank you very much.
He is here. Okay, now I can also see you. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. So Warren is the director of the UK government digital services Global Digital Market Program, which helps governments to improve systems that govern public spending, improve scrutiny through better quality, open data, and build institutional capacity and capability. So he's going to speak about his program, the work that is being done around the world, and the power of digitalization for the fight against corruption and fraud. So please, Warren, the floor is yours. I'm not sure if you have a presentation, you can share it.
I do indeed. So bear with me while I grapple with Microsoft Teams, and hopefully this should be a seamless presentation. So hopefully you can see the blue screen with my name on it.
We can.
Brilliant. Okay, great. And also apologies, it's school time, so there may be some background noise, but let's see if we can persevere through this. So firstly, thank you very much for this opportunity. It's an honor to be alongside distinguished guests and esteemed colleagues on such an important subject. So it's really great to be here. And thank you, Francesco. As the slide here says, my name is Warren Smith. I'm from the UK Government Digital Service. I'm also a representative of the UK government on a couple of multilateral organisation thematic groups, which are very relevant to this area. But moving swiftly on, I think I would just like to cover GDS's international work, which ultimately we are focused on innovative, adaptive, and above all, digital government approaches to address corruption in public procurement. And so it was great to hear the opening comments from Mr. Penrose and Mr. Gallo. I think this is indeed some interesting and very challenging times that we've had to show the agility and the adaptability in order to respond to the challenges that the pandemic presents to us, not least because of the challenges around corruption. And I think this is where it's all about engaging with broad networks of diverse stakeholders to advance progress towards a shared vision for systemic change. And so to this end, we're working with national and local governments to improve systems that govern public spending, but also to increase the scrutiny, as you've already mentioned. But I think there's a really key part in terms of building institutional capability and capacity, particularly around ensuring that integrity is central to the interactions between public and private sector. So I'm just going to cover what we mean by digital in this respect. So for our perspective, this is about applying the culture of the internet era, which supports collaborative, consensus-based and evidence-based decision-making. And by evidence-based, we talk about meeting user needs through research. This also means building coalitions and advocacy networks, working in the open and enabling experimentation and supporting people to focus on the problems to solve, the outcomes to achieve a social purpose, meeting the needs of communities across civil society. Also means applying the working practices and processes of the internet era, so standards-based and outcomes-based approaches that tackle problems incrementally and iteratively, so looking at short feedback loops. But also means investing in trusted and empowered teams, multidisciplinary teams that are focused on meeting user needs, using digital, open and network systems and tools of governance. Also means applying the business models of the internet era, so moving away from traditional approaches and embracing multi-supplier delivery, including social enterprises, voluntary organizations, co-designing, co-delivering services with end users, as well as collaborative commissioning across organizational boundaries, looking at other mechanisms like payment by results and social impact bonds. And it also means applying the tools, techniques and technologies of the internet era, such as open source software, open data, big data analytics and data science skills. But I think there's a really important point to make around machine learning and artificial intelligence, and that's about ensuring that it's used responsibly and ethically, and also knowing when and how to best use these new emerging and frontier technologies to best meet user needs. So ultimately, this is really all about how we help to take advantage of these opportunities provided by digital and looking at the entire public spending lifecycle, planning, procuring, contracting and implementing to design out opportunities for corruption, fraud, manifest. And ultimately, this is fundamental to help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So we've been speaking to many organizations, in particularly Southeast Asia, started off in person, but very quickly we had to adapt our engagement approach to virtual, and that's both at national and subnational, regional and local levels. But we've also been speaking to many other users around the world, excuse me, across the different regions, so Latin America, Southern Africa, Europe, and Asia Pacific as well. So specifically on Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, we've been helping the National Public Procurement Agency, LKPP, to redesign their standard bidding document, which is used by over 700 procurement agencies at national, provincial and local government levels. And this is really about helping to introduce a design-led, a user-led approach to simplifying that critical document. And that involves looking at the structure, incorporating design elements, and also simplifying the language. And we've also been working with the Jabbar Digital Service in the West Java province to provide design, critique and user research strategy advice for their design systems, which is now being implemented with their open data service. And we're also supporting open ownership's work, hi Tom, in Indonesia, for example, through joint engagements with the Ministry of Law and Human Rights. And we've also been developing and published a case study in our digital buying guide in collaboration with the UN Global Pulse Lab Jakarta and UN Women on the value of inclusive design to ensure that cities work for women. And as with the guide itself, this is and other case studies are available in Bahasa Indonesia, Spanish, and English. And I think it's really key that we remember and put at the absolute center of our approaches to tackling corruption, gender equality and social inclusion is really fundamental. In terms of Malaysia, we've been supporting the Malaysian Administrative Modernisation and Management Planning Unit, or MAMPU, with technical advice and support covering development of data sharing policy, the adoption of the Open Contracting Data Standard, as well as procurement framework design for cloud services. And we've also been working with MAMPU to develop a plan for hosting an open government prototyping hackathon, which will be open to ministries across the federal government and will coincide with next month's International Anti-Corruption Day. At the subnational level, we've been working with Digital Penang. We're co-creating standards covering user research, API development, application programming interface, and also data sharing policy again. And this will be incorporated into vendor guidance that they're developing for the procurement of digital and technology services. And also with the Selangor State Treasury, we've been delivering research and analysis on e-procurement systems, transparency and disclosure of information to support good government and accountability. In Thailand, more recently, we've been working alongside the United Nations Development Programme this year. We've delivered 2 virtual, of course, workshops with the Comptroller General's Department in the Ministry of Finance. And this covered a broad range of subjects covering the strengthening of public procurement reform in Thailand. And these workshops focused on framework agreements and also digitalization of public services, which included sharing UK government approaches to standards and assurance for digital and technology planning, procurement and service delivery. We also covered how framework agreements are implemented in the UK's digital marketplace, including the buying and selling process, registration of suppliers, and also selection criteria and evaluation processes. We've also covered the promotion of inclusivity when it comes to the supply chain, looking at local suppliers, SMEs, and also local government's participation and the role in the platform development, recommendations including on how to implement effective digital government. And not anything to do with us, but I just want to call it out. Last month during Smart City Week 2020 in Bangkok, the UK and the Thai Ministry of Digital Economy and Society jointly launched this Smart City Handbook, and it's part of plans for broader cooperation between the UK and the Thai government on smart cities. This particular handbook is just part of an initiative to work jointly looking at smart cities, and it states that every city should ideally have 4 foundational pillars in place to support the implementation: 1 on smart infrastructure, 2 on open and secure data, 3 on sound urban governance, and this is where corruption is actually cited as a major issue for smart city development, and 4 strategies on supporting smart citizens. And so we're currently in discussions with the Prosperity Fund Global Future City Programme's Southeast Asia implementation team at Mott MacDonald regarding opportunities for collaborative delivery in countries of mutual interest, but also more broadly across the Southeast Asia region. So, well worth a look. I would recommend it, this handbook. So moving on more specifically to our work to support better data and data analytics to prevent fraud and corruption, we've been working on a project called Bluetel, which was prototyped based on research and analysis in Indonesia, Mexico and South Africa. And it focuses on linking procurement system elements, for example, supplier registration and bidding, as well as open data and registers of company ownership. This helps to prevent, detect and investigate potential corruption and fraud by improving the analysis and insights gained from aggregating open data, which is generated at different stages of the procurement process and potentially from multiple sources, such as national company registers. Bluetail provides automated alerts on two important areas that support corruption and fraud prevention, which we've already heard being discussed today. And that's around potential conflicts of interest, for example, where ministers of that government may match the beneficial owners of suppliers bidding for government contracts, and also potential collusion or bid rigging, where multiple companies bidding on a competition could be owned or controlled by the same beneficiaries, persons or companies. We're currently scoping some project work with Open Ownership to work in this area in Mexico. So we started with the translation of the prototype into Spanish, as well as in Bahasa Indonesia. And one of my team, Angus, who's here, he's learning Bahasa Indonesia. He was sharing this on social media recently as well. Another project that we've been working on is around open contracting data in procurement systems, and this is a project called Silvereye, which is prototype based on research and analysis in Malaysia, Mexico, and South Africa. This looks at the importance of improving transparency and reducing opportunities for corruption in 3 out of the 5 open contracting data standards stages. So it fills an important gap in the publishing lifecycle, both as a tool for placing OCDS data into a queryable database from a low-tech source, such as spreadsheets, but also as a mechanism for aggregating data from multiple sources. Silvereye overcomes the need for multiple publishers to implement and maintain high-cost, sophisticated software, tender portals, for example, but also the primary focus is to publish and aggregate data. It's highly configurable and can be used as a contracts register as well as a data quality monitoring platform. And so by ensuring that only compliant data is submitted to the database, Silvereye provides a robust, consistent and reliable data pipeline for administrators who can use the underlying data for either further publishing or for their own transparency needs. It also uses the same underlying data structures as the Bluetail tool, meaning that it's possible to implement both projects on the same database. It's also been added to the Open Data Services Cooperative Airtable Tools Gallery so that OCDS implementers around the world can use it. The Open Contracting Partnership, and hi Ben, has also approved a new transactions extension which was developed during this piece of work, and really that was in response to the COVID-19 global health crisis and the need for publishers to expose higher quality transaction data that includes details like individual line items, approvers, taxes paid. And so we developed the new extension that can be used to publish this kind of data, and it's sufficiently detailed to allow auditors and anti-fraud investigators to run ongoing anti-corruption services. Again, this is available to any OCDS implementer around the world. So finally, I just want to briefly cover the work that's related to this, but outside of Southeast Asia, specifically in Mexico and South Africa. One of our projects in Mexico is supporting anti-corruption secretariats in 3 pilot states, Chihuahua, Jalisco, and Oaxaca, to connect their data on public officials with Mexico's national digital platform. And this work focuses on 2 specific data sets out of 6. So what they call System 2 is around public officials who are involved in the public procurement process and contracts, and System 3, which has sanctioned public officials and individuals. So improving the effectiveness of Mexico's national digital platform is an integral part of the national anti-corruption system. This work is important to help tackle corruption because it enables the National Secretariat to gather, consult, and cross-examine key information to prevent, investigate, and sanction corruption and fraud from all levels of government. And the aim until April next year is to scale this work across all 32 states, helping Mexico to have a truly national view on and ability to mitigate corruption and fraud risk and to implement the obligations of the National Anti-Corruption System law. And you can see Cesna, who's the secretary, have also been tweeting about this. And in South Africa, we've been working with the National Treasury's Office of the Chief Procurement Officer, initially to develop prototype spend dashboards. And these prototypes are fed into the development of the OCPO's first live COVID-19 procurement dashboard. These reflect items procured, values, procuring entities, and also company names, as well as the names of the directors in those companies, so contributing to our collective priorities on beneficial ownership transparency. So finally, I just wanted to return to the kind of opening points that I was making around the importance of digital government, and indeed reiterating what we've heard from Mr. Penrose and Mr. Gallo, is the importance of digital. And the way that I've kind of thinking of that is as an antidote to corruption, and that's not a word being used by accident in this current times, but I think thinking of digital not only as the tools and techniques, but also the culture, the methodologies, the mindset, and the principles behind what digital government means. Thinking of it as a cross-cutting, enabling element of tackling corruption in public procurement to successfully achieve the SDGs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Warren, for this thorough description of your work and your program. We're gonna take some questions later on. I would like to now go straight to our next speaker, which is Bernardine Ferns. He is the head of infrastructure at the Open Contracting Partnership, working to pioneer open contracting worldwide using open data. She was previously Associate Director and Regional Manager for Latin America and Southeast Asia of COST International, another NGO that we know well, the Infrastructure and Transparency Initiatives. So she will describe the work of Open Contracting Partnership, and she will give us some information on open contracting data standards, which are a very smart way to standardize and make data interoperable. So thank you, Ben, for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Francesco. I just want to check if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. Great. Well, thanks so much, Francesco, for inviting me once again. It's a real pleasure to be here, and really excited also to be here with so many friends. Hi, Warren. Hi, Tom. And also excited to see Rowena and Kyril, who are also friends and allies of OCP. So in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to talk to you about the open contracting approach, how it can improve or help improve data analytics and tools to help fight fraud and corruption. And we've heard a lot today already about procurement and all the different ways and various different things that we can do around procurement. But I'm going to rewind a little bit and talk about why procurement. So that's very much our starting point for the work that we do at Open Contracting. And the reason why we do so much work on procurement is because it's government's #1 corruption risk. And procurement, public procurement, has been the #1 corruption risk long before the pandemic even begun. And oh, that's weird. Sorry, let me go back. Here we go. So in this slide, you'll see, I'm going to move you down, Francesco. Good. In this slide, you'll see some numbers of how corruption affects procurement in the OECD and EU. And this trend is mirrored also in Southeast Asia. This slide here shows you some of the numbers of what this looks like in Indonesia. You'll see similar patterns. So, for example, $4 billion is lost to public procurement corruption every year in Indonesia. We know that 80% of corruption cases relate to public procurement. This is according to KPK. And also 33% of companies say that gifts were expected to secure government contracts. So it's clearly a huge issue. And in the light of the pandemic, COVID has exacerbated these challenges. And we heard from Giovanni earlier on about some of the reasons for this. And we know that crisis situations are ripe for corruption. And in the first 4 months of the pandemic, for example, government spent over $100 billion on COVID-19 contracts, and that's in the first 4 months alone. So some of the issues, as Giovanni talked about, it's soaring funding levels, it's reduced financial controls, there's a huge amount of frequently changing actors and a flood of new actors also entering the market. And what this means is that low levels of transparency, digitization, coordination, it's all created a kind of Hunger Games scenario as hospitals, public health agencies, and state governments, national governments, they're all scrambling to purchase essential equipment, medicine, and services. And what we've seen as a result of that is that millions and millions of dollars have been squandered on questionable purchases. So, for example, we've seen ventilators that were ordered and paid for that never arrived in Israel. We've seen counterfeit masks that don't actually work in the US. And again, in the US, we've seen test tubes that were ordered that also turned out to be actually mini soda bottles, were actually completely useless for the purposes for which they were bought. And in one dramatic case, we've also seen a raspberry farm in Bosnia who actually won a $6 million contract to supply ventilators. So clearly this is a huge issue, and it's not limited to goods and services alone. So in infrastructure, we've also seen similar patterns. And we know that billions of dollars has been spent on infrastructure response and will be spent in the recovery phase. So AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, for example, launched a $5 billion package for health infrastructure, and all of that will be spent in an 18-month period. This includes projects in Indonesia and China and India. And this doesn't even include what will be spent in the infrastructure recovery stage. So as governments around the world scramble to invest in infrastructure as a mechanism to spur growth and prosperity, stimulate the economy. The UK government, for example, will be spending about $640 billion in the next 5 years on infrastructure. And again, in Indonesia, there's going to be a $430 million spend in the next 4 years. So these are huge amounts of money. And even before COVID, we know that almost 30% of infrastructure investments were lost to corruption, mismanagement, and inefficiency. So in the thick of this pandemic, what we need to do, and what we need now more than ever, is to close those infrastructure gaps, to squeeze mismanagement, to radically reduce corruption, so that we can transform public procurement to deliver the goods, services, and works that everyone so desperately needs. So what can we do about it? And this is where open contracting can help. So open contracting is a global norm. It has been endorsed by the G7, the G20, and in various fora, the OECD, for example, and the recent infrastructure governance recommendations. It's also an open government partnership norm. And so many in Southeast Asia and Indonesia, for example, being one of the founding members of OGP, will be familiar with this. And open contracting has fast become a very practical mechanism to implement OGP commitments in national action plans. So to date, we have over 189 OGP commitments to open contracting in national action plans. And of course, we also complement sister initiatives such as EITI, costs. We'll talk a little bit about beneficial ownership data standards later on. So let's talk a little bit about what open contracting actually is and who OCP are. So Open Contracting Partnership, or OCP, we work with governments, businesses, civil society, academia, media to transform public procurement to deliver better goods, services, and works for everyone. And we do this using the power of open data. We use open data combined with active citizen engagement and stakeholder engagement and participatory mechanisms so that we can help to reduce corruption, improve competition, and drive better value for money, and deliver better quality goods, services, and works, and also to build credibility and trust. And at the core of our work, there are two open data standards that help stakeholders to publish and use standardized, structured, machine-readable open data in a timely manner so that it's easier to understand what works and what doesn't. And from there, you can start to identify solutions and introduce reforms. So this is an example of a visualization of what the open contracting data standard looks like. And you'll see that it takes you through all the way from the planning stages right through to bidding, award, contract, and implementation. So it takes you through the entire life cycle of the public procurement process. And here you'll see a visualization of what the open contracting for infrastructure data standard looks like, which joins up contracts to infrastructure projects. So as you know, infrastructure projects often have more than one contract related to it. And so this data standard takes the best of the OCDS and helps you to join up all the different contracts in a project so that you can understand overall how projects are performing. And these data standards are the basis for building and sharing tools that help to use and analyze information. So I'm going to give you an example from Malaysia. This is one of the tools that we've worked with some of the team that Warren talked about earlier with Mampu, the Ministry of the Modernization Unit in Malaysia. It's a red flags tool. It uses the open contracting red flags methodology to identify potential collusion and corruption at the tender stages itself. So it's very much preventative, so that you can identify, what the risks are even before contracts are being awarded. So rather than looking at it retrospectively. And so in this slide, you'll see, some of the indicators or some of the red flags that can be triggered to alert the oversight agencies if something is not going right. So, for example, if the same company wins contracts every single time, or if there's a pattern to the way suppliers win contracts. For example, if there's a rotation, so first company A wins today's tender, then the next tender goes to company B, and then the next one goes to company C, and then that repeats all over again. And so Warren talked earlier on about some of the great work that GDS is doing in Malaysia, and we're so excited to be partnering with them on that. And the Silver Eye tool, absolutely is something that very much complements this red flags tool that we've been working on also. And one of the exciting things about it is that it can join up with different data sets. And later, I'm sure Tom will talk a little bit also about beneficial ownership. And one of the aspirations for this tool is to join up with beneficial ownership data so that you can understand not just which companies are winning contracts, but who the owners behind those companies are and whether or not there's real competition. So in this next slide, I'm just going to show you very quickly, some of the guidance that we've got on red flags and red flags indicators. So you'll see in this slide that over here, you have it details the contracting phases and then the associated corruption schemes, the red flags that's associated with that scheme, what the description of the indicator is, and also what the OCDS fields are that are needed to calculate that. I keep doing that. Here we go. Good. And in this slide, it's also an example of red flags from Bandung in Indonesia. And all I want to say on this slide is that you can use red flags for analysis even without building a tool. So you can actually run the analysis even if you don't have an automated tool, for example, in Malaysia or elsewhere. And recently we carried out some analysis on Bandung OCDS procurement data. And in this slide, for example, we looked at which buyers have the most delays and what that pattern looks like over time. So you don't always have to build a tool. Next, I'll take you through to Paraguay. So this is, again, an exciting example of working with our partners to ensure the accurate identification and publication of COVID-19 emergency procurement. What happened there is that journalists have been very actively using this data to hold decision makers to account. And we've seen reported in media recently a very striking case where a state-owned enterprise purchased large volumes of tonic water at 5 times the market price, allegedly because it could protect against the virus, which obviously it couldn't. So it's already starting to, these types of approaches are starting to identify discrepancies and identify issues even during this crisis situation. So there are things that we can do and that can be done to procurement is done well even in the times that we live in currently. So finally, in my next 2 slides, I want to talk about some of the successes. I've talked a lot about the analytics and what we can do on the technical side using data, but I also want to talk now about what we can achieve from it. And in this slide, you'll see an example from the Ukraine. So the Ukraine adopted the open contracting approach and developed this state-of-the-art, very transparent, very interactive, and highly participatory procurement system called Prozoro, where basically the tagline was that everyone could see everything. Now, in the first year alone of implementing the system, the Ukraine made over $1 billion in savings just from the efficiency gains alone. We know that thousands of new suppliers have flooded the market, so that's an improvement of 45%. And also, very importantly, the perceptions of corruption halved. So I think this is really one of the key takeaways of how doing better with open contracting and open data analytics can really help to deliver real improvements. And then in this next slide, this is by far one of my favorite examples of open contracting successes. This is an example from Colombia. So in Colombia, they worked with us and applied the open contracting approach. What they did was radically transform, again, their procurement system so that it was more open and so the data was more joined up. And during the course of this process, they identified that there was an issue with the way their school meals were being tendered and delivered. So first of all, prices were extremely high. So chicken drumsticks and chicken breasts, for example, were being charged out at $20, $30 per piece, which was exceptionally high. Would you pay $20 or $30 for a chicken drumstick? I don't think so. And one of the reasons for why this was happening was because that there was a price fixing scheme. So there was a cartel of companies colluding together to keep the prices high, and they could do this because the way that these contracts had been tendered effectively prevented other suppliers from participating. And this was because the tenders were bundled together and they expected suppliers not only to produce the food, so the fruits, the vegetables, bananas, whatever it is, but also to distribute it across the school network. And so this meant that many of the smaller suppliers couldn't participate because they could either do one or the other. They can either produce the food or they can distribute it. So by using open data and using the open contracting approach, they managed to uncover corruption, and they also managed to uncover the deficiencies in the way that the public procurement process was being handled. And by unbundling those contracts, they managed to then drastically increase competition, increase supplier participation, because more companies could participate. So you'll see now that as a result of that, supply diversity has increased by over 350%, costs have come down, and more importantly, over 700,000 school meals are being served every day. So I think that's a really meaningful, a really impactful way of how open contracting can actually change lives and improve things for the better. Just that I've talked a lot about data, I've talked a lot about tools, but I'm hoping that in the last 2 examples, I've driven home the point that it's not just about numbers, it's not just about data, it's about driving real change on the ground. And linked to that is a lot of work that's needed to build the capacities of citizens, civil society organizations, media, academia, and governments also, so that we can together collaborative work to use that data to deliver better results. So I'm going to stop there and hand back over to Francesco.
Thank you so much, Ben. Also very interesting presentation, and thanks for highlighting the various projects. I'll have some questions, but now we'll go to first our next speaker, which is Tom Thompson. He's the Executive Director of Open Ownership. He is an expert on open data. He was previously head of data policy for the UK government. He has led some of the UK biggest open data commitments at the national and global level, and has spent his career ensuring that good data is being produced and used inside and outside government. So without further ado, Tom, the floor is yours. And I want to remind, please, the attendees, expert, all of you, to post your questions in the chat box or raise your hand, and you will be given the floor after Tom's presentation. So please, Tom, go ahead.
Well, good morning or afternoon, everyone. Francesco, can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see it well.
Well, fantastic. That's a good start. Hello, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank UNODC, the Government Digital Service, and Open joining us this morning. My name's Tom Townsend. I'm the Executive Director of Open Ownership. And I want to talk to you a little bit about beneficial ownership data, what that means in practice and how that can be used for analytical purposes to tackle corruption. So I want to give you a quick introduction to who we are as an organisation, tell you a little bit about the beneficial ownership data standard itself, and give you some examples of some data analysis in action. So firstly, who we are. We're an organisation that was created nearly 4 years ago in 2017, really to do two things. Firstly, build a global standard for publishing beneficial ownership information. And secondly, make sure that that standard and all of the work that goes around making use of that data is implemented effectively. And what that means in practice is supporting directly 30 or so governments around the world to implement effective systems for collecting, processing, publishing, and analysing this data. And I think most importantly of all, supporting all of the communities around that to make the very best use of it that they can. This is a quick global snapshot of where we are on beneficial ownership disclosure. And I think one really important thing to mention that's different about beneficial ownership disclosure than public procurement data is that we still have some hearts and minds to win. The public disclosure of beneficial ownership data in a structured format really is the best next step for tackling corruption. Not everyone agrees with us on this, but as you can see from what's on screen, there are many countries around the world, in all regions of the world, that have taken that first step. So we're working with around 35 of them. They're highlighted there on screen by that dark red or pink dot. But there are around 90 or so countries, and it's growing every day, who have committed to some form of beneficial ownership disclosure. But as ever, in so many public data disclosure campaigns, we know there's a big gap between the commitment to do this and the actual effective implementation of it. We have a long way to go, but the progress is good. Momentum is with us, and the global norm is shifting. I think one thing to mention that's incredibly important that we would expect to see over the next month or so is the United States moving to a place where they at least will have a central register of beneficial ownership, such that the federal government in the US can, for the first time, see company ownership across all 50 states of the US. That's an incredibly big step forward. We know that when the US comes on board with this, then globally, the movement is going to have a great deal more energy. So how we help? We really do three things. The first is create and maintain and grow and develop the beneficial ownership data standard. The second is bringing that data together wherever it's published into a single searchable register. And then the final thing is to work on all of the expertise and growing that expertise around what good beneficial ownership disclosure looks like. It is still a new space. This is an immature disclosure campaign. Many countries around the world are really just beginning to take those first steps towards disclosure. So really thinking through all of the different dimensions of what this sort of disclosure means, the opportunities and the risks around it, and doing that deep research into it is really the third pillar of the work that we do. Firstly, though, let's talk about the beneficial ownership data standard. We've done a huge amount of deep thinking about what high quality structured data looks like for beneficial ownership. And really the primary goal of this is to make sure that this data, from whichever jurisdiction it comes from, works and plays nicely with data from other jurisdictions, from different places, making it interoperable. That's how we really achieve the benefits of beneficial ownership disclosure. What we're talking about here is making sure we have the right information about who ultimately owns and controls a company from wherever they are formed. We all know that corruption is a transnational problem as well as a domestic one, and making sure we have data from as many different jurisdictions as possible allows us to begin to analyze that at scale. So what you're seeing on screen are two things. On the left, you're seeing the kind of paper-based human disclosure of beneficial ownership as we see it in the United Kingdom, people filling out a form. And of course, on the right, what you're seeing is how that gets manifested in a data standard. So we're taking that human input and we're turning it into something that can be used across borders, across languages, and across alphabets. The second part of all of this work is the Global Register of Beneficial Ownership. This is a live collection of several countries' open beneficial ownership data combined into a single place. And really for us, we treat this as a laboratory for data use. We become publishers of data ourselves. We're doing that work. And through doing that, we really understand what best practice looks like when it comes to the publication of it, because we're a user too. So by standardizing and pooling data on beneficial ownership, we can make analysis of that informs the wider work and research that we do, and ultimately feeds back into the recommendations and technical support that we provide to countries who are implementing this themselves. We also test our own work through the beneficial ownership data standard by ingesting that. So we make sure that we're not just telling to do something and implement a standard, we're also using it ourselves. And that's a really important part of our work. The final piece of this puzzle really is the legal and technical analysis that we do around this. We also operate a help desk. Anyone in the world can get in touch and ask for advice and guidance about how beneficial ownership data works in practice and what can be done with it. And then we turn that into research and learning that's entirely open source and shared with the world. So what you're seeing on screen now are some of the deep technical analyses that we've done in countries we've been working in. We work in Ukraine, much like open contracting, and also a number of other countries around the world. And we produce specific technical advice and guidance on some of the key issues that are yet unresolved in the beneficial ownership space. And one of the biggest challenges we face is, how do we verify beneficial ownership data? How do we know the things that people have reported about their own businesses are ultimately true? That's a big challenge in this space, and we're doing a great deal of work to research that. So let me just tell you a little bit more about the beneficial ownership data standard. It's important to know this before we talk about how this information can be analysed. So what is the beneficial ownership data standard? Well, it's primarily a technical schema, in many ways like the open contracting data standard in that regard. And it's a way of describing in data how companies are owned and controlled. Importantly, it's an open source product, meaning it's free and anyone can use it or ultimately modify it. And we don't charge any kind of fee for that. So we really welcome people using this, feeding back, telling us what can be improved, and we can go away and work on that. But let's remember, the primary purpose of this data standard is to allow people to share beneficial ownership data in a way that works across borders and between government departments. It's really, really important for us to realise the benefits of beneficial ownership data through standardising it and making it useful to everybody. So, thinking in a little bit more detail about this, what is BODS? What does it do? Well, it allows tools and systems to reuse data across contexts and jurisdictions. And as I say, it's a standard for interchange. It's not a standard for collection or storage. And let's break this down a little bit further. So the fundamental unit of the beneficial ownership data standard is a statement. And those statements about company ownership cover three critical parts of what we mean by company ownership and beneficial ownership. Firstly, it's a statement about a person. Who is the beneficial owner? Where are they from? What's their date of birth? Can we uniquely identify them? Secondly, it creates a statement about what the entity itself is. What is this company? And then the third critical component is a statement about how that person owns or controls that entity. So those three parts all link together to give you, the user, an understanding of what company ownership really means in this context around this particular entity. And the standard itself is made up of unique fields and reusable elements, and they appear across the standard to make it incredibly easy to implement. What do we mean by a statement, though? I think this is really important in the beneficial ownership space. A statement in the beneficial ownership data standard is not by itself the truth. Each statement represents a claim about beneficial ownership made by a particular source at a particular point in time. So let's look at that on the right-hand side. So John Smith, this kind of common name that we find in the UK, stated that on the 1st of January 2020, he was the beneficial owner of a company listed on the 1st of January 2020. So him stating that is different from saying he was the beneficial owner of that company. We still have some ways to go to think about how we effectively verify that John Smith said something truthful in the original filing. And that's the big next frontier on all of that. But of course, open data makes that verification process easier. This is the idea that having many people, many different eyes looking at the data, using it, working with it, using red flag and analytical tools, we are likely as a community of interest to be able to hold that data to account. So this is the quick overview of it. Beneficial ownership data standard. It allows us to make sense of data received from multiple sources, multiple jurisdictions over extended periods of time. So statements and claims. This is really important. Publishing to the beneficial ownership data standard should be treated as a write-only ledger. What that means is that new statements are used to amend data contained in older statements, but those new statements are added to the register. They don't replace completely and delete the old one. And that's really, really important because beneficial ownership changes over time. And what the beneficial ownership data standard allows us to do is to create a world of data which shows us how ownership and control over a company changes over a period of time. And the reason it does that is because we know from corruption cases around the world, the movement of ownership between people, between husbands and wives, between parents and children, is often used to evade or avert investigation, to show that at a particular point in time, the company was owned by somebody else, which is why it's so critical to have that historic record of how ownership changes over time to be able to identify those things. There are a huge number of resources on our website and they're all free to use. The documentation for the schema, everything about what the beneficial ownership data standard means, the global register. We have data quality tools for understanding if you're producing things that work, and visualization tools to see what that data looks like in practice. So let's quickly think about what this means and what it means for analysis. As I mentioned, we have a register. This brings together as much open data as is currently available on beneficial ownership around the world and puts it in a single place. We have disclosures from the UK and Denmark and Slovakia, and the will hopefully be getting online soon, Latvia and 3 or 4 other countries. And we've learned a huge amount through analysing that data and storing it ourselves. The importance of identifying people properly, being able to disambiguate between them, tell one person from another, how we track ownership over time, and really importantly, how we use this data at scale and in bulk to identify challenges and corrupt practices. And this is an example of what happens when you bring together beneficial ownership data in one place. These are disclosures from different extractives industry transparency initiative companies, and they're all connected by using the UK's persons of significant control data. This picture that you're seeing on screen is not available from any other registry because this is the first time it's been put together and visualized in a single place. So this tool that you're seeing that's available on the register, register.openownership.org, this will allow you to bring together this information and visualize it in one place. And what you're seeing on screen down at the bottom, WASM, this is the Togolese, this is the holding company for the Togolese rail system. So the entire rail system in the nation of Togo. And what this reveals is a really complex web of ownership, lots of which is in the UK in private equity, some of it in Panama, and the Togolese state itself also has an ownership stake. This provides you with an instant understanding of the different power and power structures that lie behind a particular company. In terms of monitoring and using this data, this is an example of a piece of work we've been doing with the EITI to link together persons mentioned in public contracting data in Colombia to identify conflicts of interest in the extractive sector. So what this is showing is publicly available data on public contracts and linking that to politically exposed persons and showing the relationship between them. The key message here, though, is that in order to generate this data with the current situation, thousands of different disclosures from different places had to be brought together and done manually. But despite only checking around 1% of the data, they still found anomalies in this. But the information that we've used to bring together this analysis, that's all public, but the amount of effort and work required to bring this together in a meaningful way is huge because it's not standardized in the first place, because we have to get that digital infrastructure right for us to tackle corruption effectively. Warren's already mentioned this. We're beginning to bring this together in very practical ways for government. This is something that the UK government's digital service produced. It's a way of bringing together contracting information and supplier information in public procurement and immediately showing to the end user, perhaps someone in a government department, what the ownership is around that. This really removes friction from basic due diligence processes. And we believe these sorts of tools implemented well in ways that are easy to use for any government department really are going to give people the tools that they need to begin to kind of analyze and understand how procurement's working in their country, where money ultimately ends up, and begin to analyze that data at scale to tackle corruption. I'm going to finish there. It's been a pleasure. Really keen to hear your questions. I'll circulate this slide deck afterwards as well for you all to read, but thank you for your time and attention. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Tom. Great presentation as well, as always. So now let's see. We have a couple of questions from the chat box. So one is, both of them are fairly general, so I will put them to the three of you. So what would be the challenges that would be anticipated in terms of data privacy and protection, I'd say, related to your work? And another question, I would be interested in information on work done to ensure increased use of the digital systems, such as open contracting and access to information, to prevent corruption through civic monitoring. Example of cooperation with civic society, group, private sector, and media. I guess, Ben, you mentioned this in your Paraguay example, but if you could, take this couple of questions first, and then we maybe add a few more questions. So maybe Warren, you would like to go first, and then Ben, and then Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Francesco. Great questions, really fundamental, and also great presentations, Tom and Ben. So I think, challenges around data privacy and protection. I think it's really fundamental that, particularly as governments, we bake privacy, security, and data protection in everything we do when it comes to digital service design and delivery. I think it's absolutely critical that we understand what we need to do that, and also how we make that just a default setting for digital teams in government. Specifically around the data standards, I think I'll leave that to my more expert colleagues who are responsible for the two, OCDS and BODS as well. In terms of increasing use of digital systems, I think this also comes back to the importance of user-centered design in digital and technology delivery in government. if we design services to be so good that our users prefer them over any other alternative, then not to say that if you build it they will come, but I think it's a really important point about ensuring that we design out any friction and any issues with digital service delivery, and so that, yeah, the importance of those methodologies and standards in terms of how we approach that. And then finally, on civic participation, I think there's a fundamental kind of opportunity when you combine open data and engagement with civil society, at every stage of the public spending life cycle, but particularly at the planning stage, particularly at the stage where you've even before you've got to the public procurement, you're able to really engage meaningfully and genuinely about how governments' plans and intentions on how public money is going to be spent on service delivery is going to affect them, and enfranchising civil society to actually have a voice in helping to shape strategies, implementation plans, and ultimately being the arbiter of monitoring and evaluation in that respect. Hopefully that answered questions.
Thanks, Warren. Ben, would you like to go next?
Thanks, Francesco. So also echoing what Warren said, I think, these are great questions. So the first one in terms of how we deal with the challenges relating to privacy and data protection. So as Warren says, absolutely agree that we always design the process to align with whatever the local or national legislations and regulations are, right? So we wouldn't require anything that would contravene whatever is permitted by your local environment. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing that I'd say is that I think very often when we talk about opening up public procurement or opening up public data, there is this real worry that we're asking for, sensitive data, either commercially sensitive or publicly sensitive. And this is actually really not the case. And I just put a link in the chat for a great report that we've developed at Open Contracting. It's called Myth-Busting Commercial Confidentiality. And it talks about what's actually commercially sensitive and what should be confidential and what shouldn't be. So with the open contracting approach, and also with BODS and the work that Warren and his team are doing, it's really about looking at what are the key pieces of information that people need to know to understand how their government is performing and whether or not that's actually delivering for them. So it's not really asking for anything commercially sensitive. It's not really asking for anything anything very dramatic. It's really about the basic pieces of information that gives you end-to-end transparency from the public procurement process. So I think that's the first thing. And I really encourage everyone to look at the commercial myth-busting commercial confidentiality report, because that answers a lot of those objections that you will find to opening up data. So, for example, one of the myths is that you can't do this type of work if you don't have an access to information law or freedom of information law. And that's absolutely a myth, because there are many countries, many programs that we work on around the world that do this work even without a right to information law. And one of them, for example, is Malaysia, right? We've been doing all this great work with red flags, and that's because there was this commitment in the modernization unit to develop this work, despite the fact that there isn't an FOI. So have a look at that. The second question also is another great question. How do we work with civil society and other actors to make sure that this work is actually meaningful and inclusive and actually gets to the results that we want? So we do a lot of work on this on many fronts. So we've talked a lot about publishing and using data. We've talked a little bit less about who's going to be publishing data. Very often we assume that it's going to be governments that publish data, and very often that is the case because they do own a lot of the data. But in locations where perhaps the government might not be ready to publish that data, we have worked with civil society organizations excuse me, or civic tech organizations who then publish that data because maybe they have the capacity, they have the tech, you know, they have the interest in doing so. So some examples are in India, where we've been working with a great team called Civic Data Labs. They're a civic tech organization, and they've been scraping data that's already in the public domain. So in India, for example, they do have a right to information law. They have lots of data available in different, you know, portals and different platforms, but it's not consolidated, it's not aggregated, and it's not in open data format. So they've been scraping that data, collating it on their Open India, Open Budgets platform, and publishing it for everyone else, and building in some analytics for that as well. It's a similar process that we've been doing in Indonesia, where we've been working with Indonesia Corruption Watch, where again, you know, they get a lot of data from LKPP, and they analyze that data and turn it into something useful for people to easily see. Because we've talked a lot about data, but the reality is that data in itself is useless unless it's used, right? And if you get raw data, if you get lots of JSON files, that's not necessarily going to be the most useful for the person on the street. So, and that links to this question, in that we need to find ways to make data useful and to make data meaningful. So that includes, you know, these types of data analytics tools where you can analyze the data so that I, as a user on the street, can understand what it means in a very quick way. So at a glance, I can understand if it's good or if it's bad, you know, how much is being spent, who is spending the money, whether the spending is the right things, etc. So those are some ways in which we do that. So we support government and non-government actors to publish data, to use data. There's a lot of capacity building that's needed around understanding, you know, how to use data and what tools you can build on it. And linked to that, we do a lot of work to ensure that tools are reusable as well. So if, for example, something has been developed, like a tool has been developed in Indonesia, it's really important to make sure that that's open source and that can be shared, so that, you know, if somebody else you know, in Thailand, for example, wants to run a similar red flags process, they can reuse the codes without having to build it from scratch. And then linked to that also, there's a lot of advocacy work that needs to be done, and we provide a lot of materials and guidance and tools to help all the different stakeholders advocate for you know, more inclusion and more participation. And happy to talk more about this offline as well.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you also for sharing the note. Tom, maybe for you it's going to be more difficult, the privacy question.
I'll keep this brief. Ben and Warren have really covered the fundamentals of it, ensuring that whatever disclosure regime is implemented complies with local laws and policies on data protection, absolutely fundamental. And of course, making sure that the underlying cybersecurity approach is good and works with whatever data you're storing. This is just good practice and has to be considered from the start. Just on beneficial ownership data specifically, it's really worth remembering why there has been a global push to change beneficial ownership rules around the world. They are fundamentally designed to stop people being able to be anonymous when it comes to what companies they own and what money they are in receipt of, because it is that anonymity that allows a huge amount of often criminal behavior to be obscured. So fundamental in beneficial ownership disclosure is lifting the veil of anonymity around companies. And when we try to do that, we naturally encounter lots of people who are likely to be disadvantaged by doing that, those people that have benefited from opaque companies. So understandably, there is always going to be a pushback against that. And we are taking information that was previously hidden and we're making it public. It is natural then that people will query whether or not that has an impact on their privacy. And it does, because the problem is anonymity. The solution is being clear about who people are. We cannot make that change without challenging the notion of when it is okay to be anonymous in what you own and what you control and when you can't. So that's the fundamentals of this. We have to move to a space where people cannot simply hide behind multiple different companies in multiple jurisdictions, which allow them to launder money or hide illicit assets or otherwise engage in behavior that is not legal or unethical within their jurisdiction. But I think this is the really, really key point. Information about company ownership is incredibly important for all of the work that we're doing here. When we publish that information, this is not brand new information going into the kind of data space, information about people or company owners. This can be found in different ways and in different parts of the sort of data landscape in lots of different ways. What we often see is a far greater risk in corruption cases from the children of very rich, often corrupt people using anonymous companies, posting their location or how many cars they own on Instagram, producing some kind of security risk, than we will find from that information being published on a register. So let's not be under any illusions. If people are already engaging in this behavior, there will be lots of ways for people to find out if they are wealthy or connected to something. The publication of that information on a beneficial ownership register is not fundamentally going to change someone's ability, if they really want to find out about something, to identify a beneficial owner. So I think in some ways the privacy debate is a really important one. It's a question that we must be able to answer effectively. But ultimately, where I see that argument coming from much more strongly is from those people that fundamentally oppose the idea that opaque companies are a bad thing. So I think we have to sort of treat the question as an important one, but also understand where that question comes from and what motivates people to ask it in the first place.
Okay, thank you for your answers, which are very comprehensive. There is another question, I guess, for the three of you. In the Philippines, it's particularly hard to legalize a form of data gatherings that could effectively be used against corruption. Based on models from various states, what would be the optimized delineation of acceptable data which could be used for government analytics, and how did the public service government data gathering? So I guess the question is really about you know, the type of data that could be gathered in a place like the Philippines, where, you know, there are a number of restrictions in place. Person that asked the question also said that, you know, it's difficult even to gather ID data in the country to set up a centralized ID system. So I guess it's a bit of a. Any one of you would like to take it?
I can start if that's helpful.
Sure.
So, thanks, Francesco. So, so first of all, I think it's worthwhile saying that we are also working with our friends at GPPB and PhilJEPS, which is the National Procurement Agency, on various open contracting approaches. And we expect that very soon we should have some OCDS data in the coming year or so. So that's great news. Secondly, I think the first thing that I'm going to say about what data should be collected and what data should be published really depends on what your use case is. So, and when we say use case, we mean what is the problem that you're trying to solve? So the open contracting approach is not about opening up everything all at once. It's about understanding what the problem is that you want to solve, and then from there developing the data sets, or collecting the data sets, or identifying the data fields and the indicators that will help you understand your problem, and then working from there. So if, for example, your use case is to reduce corruption, the data sets that you collect from that might be very different from if, say, you want to improve efficiency. There's going to be some difference in what data you want to collect and what data you want to publish. So I think in the work that we do, the first thing is to identify what your use case is, and then work from there to see what should be published. And then we also do a scoping process working with our help desk. So we also operate a free help desk that can help with this work to identify not just what data you need, but also what data you have, and then based on what data you have, what you can actually calculate from it, like what that data that you have can tell you, and then make a plan for how you can improve and expand to the additional data sets. So the second thing, so linked to that, is really about an incremental approach. So you don't have to open up everything all at once. And certainly in the work that we've done, we work within the parameters of what exists and then improve over time, right? So, and we do have, as part of our internal KPIs as well, we look at, for example, OCDS publishers who have improved over time. So even if, for example, if you have the best data set and the best data quality today, we will keep working with you to make sure that that keeps improving over time, that you are adding additional data sets or joining up with other data sets, for example, with beneficial ownership data or others, building tools around it. So it's very much an incremental approach. Hope that helps.
Thanks. Warren or Tom, you would like to add something here? Otherwise, there's also, yes, Warren, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think I was just to echo everything that Ben's just said. So I've ticked off the words that I was going to mention, but absolutely incremental and starting with areas that are most kind of important to you based on the needs and the problems you're trying to solve. I think without question, I think that's a really important approach. And also, you might be surprised by what data already exists and who already has that data, possibly duplicated. So it's understanding to what extent does that information need to be shared? How could we perhaps support that information sharing? But also the community. I mean, there is a global community who've been tackling similar challenges to this in their own jurisdictions. And so, it's not about starting from scratch or reinventing the wheel. There's a lot of people who've done really great stuff and continue to do really great stuff. So tap into that community. So yeah, I think that's all I would say.
Tom, please go ahead.
Echo what everyone said already, but just wanted to add one thing really about stepping back and asking ourselves, what is all of this for? Corruption is a massive problem in the world. We are losing money all of the time, which more now than ever before, we absolutely need to put into our public services, to put into our pandemic response and put into recovery. That's the goal here. And it's understanding, I think, what is the data infrastructure? What is the accessibility that governments need, that civil society needs to be able to meaningfully start to tackle these problems? We will have to do it incrementally. We'll have to build the systems as we go. We'll have to make sure that whatever we're doing is legal and protects privacy and make sure that no one is at disadvantaged sort of to a degree which we're unhappy with. But ultimately, we collectively as a community have to be really clear that we are building the data infrastructure that we need to meaningfully tackle corruption. And that's not an easy task, but the prize is massive, but the task is as well. And in some ways, I think we need to never forget what that big goal is in all of this, because we can get very caught up in conversations about a data set and whether it impacts a person or a group's privacy. We have to focus on that. But let's always keep in mind what the end state is. It's better governance, which leads to a massive reduction in corruption so that the people that need the money, need the public services, get them.
Excellent points. If you can, a very quick feedback, 1 minute. If you can, is there an example in relation to strengthening sanctions through digital platforms or knowledge on the barred countries? I don't understand really that part of the question. Example in relation to strengthening sanctions. Knowledge on the barred countries worldwide through digital platforms. The barred suppliers, sorry. Is there example of the barred suppliers? And sanctions maybe that have been introduced because of work done through digital platforms? I guess that's the question. Yeah, Tom, go ahead.
Just sanctions. I think what digital offers us, particularly when it comes to beneficial ownership disclosure, it is a quick way of being able to filter out those people who have perhaps filed their beneficial ownership data incorrectly because they've made a mistake and it's a genuine mistake, and we can correct that, and also build systems which are so easy to use that those mistakes hopefully are far harder to make. And really focus our attention in our overstretched, often under-resourced investigative and law enforcement agencies, focus that time and attention on the biggest prizes, those people who are undertaking corrupt or criminal practices. So I think the offer of digital here is when we have the data, it is structured, and we're able to analyze it at scale, we can really support those people to file correctly and comply really, really well with the regulations, and focus our attention, law enforcement's attention, on those people that need it most. So I think that's the really, really important part around what digitization offers our sanctions and enforcement regime. And I'll hand over to Warren and Ben for more talk about the procurement side of that.
30 seconds, please.
Okay, yeah. Just build on absolutely on what Tom said, and also what John Penrose mentioned in terms of efficiency, effectiveness, and innovation. If we can use digital to really pinpoint the efforts to where it needed, I think that rather than it being kind of a manual, paper-based, labor-intensive approach, I think is really key. So yeah.
And very quickly from me, thanks, Francesco. So absolutely agree with everything that Tom and Warren have said, but also I want to add something to this conversation by saying that I think sanctions are important, that obviously we need accountability and we need some kind of enforcement for bad behavior, but also, and very often what's just as effective is participatory mechanisms. So where you have these feedback loops between the decision makers or the authorities and the other stakeholders, so that you can have that dialogue and you can work together to deliver improvements. So in the Ukraine, for example, I talked earlier about the Prozoro platform, which is about public procurement and opening up data. But linked to that, there's also a citizen monitoring platform called DoZoro, where citizens can actively monitor all of the procurements that's happening on the Prozoro platform, and they can also lodge complaints, right? So, thousands and thousands of complaints have been lodged so far, and we know that there's a 50% fix rate, for example. So we know that, government is responding to the complaints that citizens and journalists and media are raising, and they're fixing it, which is really the end result that we want to get to. And there are also other examples like development check for infrastructure projects, for example, where citizens are going out to monitor these projects, they are logging their complaints, and then the government responds, and they can show that once they've responded, this is how they improved, and then you get that fixed rate. So I think that's just as important as sanctions, to have this kind of collaborative approach and this feedback loop across all the stakeholders so that we can work together.
Absolutely. So thank you very much, Ben, Warren, Tom, for your insightful presentations and for answering these questions. Stick around. Now we are going through the next section of our webinar. So the next session will discuss national perspective on digitalization against corruption. We have also here, we have actually 4 distinguished speakers from countries in the region. The first one is Mrs. Patraporn, which I see there. Hello, thank you for joining us. She is the Deputy Director of the Controller General Department at the Ministry of Finance of Thailand, which has a key role in oversight and control of public expenditure. So she will give us a brief round through of the history of electronic government procurement in Thailand, and she will then outline the current measure that Thailand has adopted to promote transparency in public procurement. So Mrs. Patraporn, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, all the country. I would like to say to thank you for let Thailand to join for this seminar. Next time we will see together, but at this time because of COVID, that's why we in the another country. It's okay, no problem. Can you hear me? Everyone can hear me?
We can hear you well, thank you.
Okay, I will start. Okay, next slide. First of all, that you just mentioned about the my position that I come from the Comptroller General Department, or we can call just only CGD, is a central government agency who is responsible for the public procurement and has developed Public Procurement and Supply Management Act in the year of 2016 in order to promote efficiency, transparency, and value for money in the public procurement. And Thai government emphasized that and anti-corruption policy as one of the priority, the first priority to look that against for the corruptions. So the government assigned the Comptroller General Department to develop tools to promote transparency in the public procurement. And the new tool should consider about the efficiency, transparency, value for money, and public participation as key success factor. This is going to be out for my presentation for today. First topic, I will talk about the electronic government procurement, and the next topic is about how to support transparency in Thailand, and the next part is about statistics of the cost of Thailand and the future plan in Thailand. Next slide. This slide is I will talk about the electronic government procurement in Thailand. Thailand has developed electronic government procurement for 8 years since 2010. It means that all the government agencies have to operate the procurement process in the e-government procurement system. They must input information and publish bidding announcement of every procurement method, such as e-bidding, e-market, selection method, and specific method on the central website. Moreover, we also interface procurement data to payment system in Thailand, the government fiscal management information system, or as you know, in another country is we call GFMIS. And another part is the commercial bank. Right now, you can see on this slide, we have they have a Krung Thai bank and government saving bank, and also they have a lot of the commercial bank in this slide. You can see that in the right hand side in the bottom. This is going to be the commercial bank. And also we have a Thai consultant database center. This procurement reform also improve treasury management because Thailand using online payment system, which make the disbursement process faster and reduce human error as well. Moreover, we stipulate in the regulation that the government agency must pay money to the supplier account within 3 days after the inspection is completed. Next slide, I will talk about how Thailand to support the transparency in Thailand. And as you see in this slide that Thailand support transparency by creating website we call the government spending data.go.th. The first page is to prepare website called data.go.th, which gather the procurement data from the EGP and present in various form on website and mobile phone. Data.go.th is a website that discloses public spending on the government project based on the procurement database of the Comptroller General Department. Everyone can search for the name of the agency, companies, or project by using keyword, and it can be displayed a brief overview of statistics. or we can call just a dashboard. These details in the dashboard are such as the total number of which show in the graph, relevant type of the report, detail of the winner of each bidding project. This is also a specific map to display in the various of the one-click image map. The detail in the data.go.th are usually we update in monthly. And this slide, we also prepare the website Thailand government spending in order to gain the data from the other agencies, such as the Bureau of the Budget, Electronic Government Agency, and Office of the Public Sector Anti-Corruption Commissions. This website can disclose information of annual budget and the disbursement of the fund from the GFMIS system of the belong to our organization. And next slide, we will talk about about anti-corruption is one of the nation policy of the government that I just mentioned it that this is a first priority for the Thailand to protect from the corruption, so that the government has agreed and approved the Applied Integrity Pact, or we can call IP, in the government procurement project on February 3rd in the 2015, in the year of the 2015. The cabinet agree in the principle on the IP guideline and approved to set up the anti-corruption cooperation committees chaired by the finance minister and representatives from the public sector, private sector, and civil society. The committee has the authority to determine to the IP guideline and select the IP project. IP project is a written agreement among third party which composed of the government agencies, bidders, and observers. The observers are expected renowned from their ability, experience, and honesty. They will be selected by anti-organization of Thailand, or we can call ACT. The observer will observe the monitor the whole process of the government procurement, start from the draft of the term of reference to the end of the project. The observer can list doubt and ambitious matter or suspicious behavior which might lead to the corruption practice. They can then take a report or file complaint to the process entity and to related organizations, such as the National Anti-Corruption Commission, the Office of the Public Sector Anti-Corruption Commission, or the Office of the Auditor General of Thailand. And next slide, I will tell you that another measure is infrastructure transparency initiative, or as you know, in another country we call COST. COST is a global movement that helps countries implement transparency and accountability in the public infrastructure. Thailand joined COST in 2014. The Comptroller General Department is a national secretariat. The measure aims to improve public participation in public construction projects. We have developed COST Thailand website to be main system of the operation. It includes user interface for the procuring entity officer, Comptroller General Department officer, and the public. COST has 4 features, which are the first one is a multi-stakeholder group, or we can call MSG. 2 feature is a disclosure, and third one is assurance, and the fourth one is a social accountability. I will more explain you about the 4 features. The first one is MSG. MSG is in order to improve transparency public construction project. COST needs multi-stakeholder work from the private sector and civil society who have different perspectives and backgrounds. Cross Thailand MSG consists of 9 from the public sector and 4 from the private sector and 4 from the civil society. Next is about the disclosure. Cross Thailand has a 2 disclosure portal. Cross Thailand website, we compose of the Cross Thailand website and Cross Thailand Facebook page to disclose to the data and information of the construction project, which are selected to the participate in Cross Thailand. As part of course, government agencies are required to publish 40 data points online the public view. The data span across the key stages of the project, from the identification and procurement to implementation and completion. The system collects about 25 data points and publish it on the cost website. Some data include the budget of the project, contract value, and the number of the bidder. It also requires procuring entity to fill in another 15 data points on the Cost Thailand website. The third one is assurance. Cost Thailand International Secretariat define assurance as an independent review of the disclosed data by the assurance teams appointed by the Cost Nation program. The team to look at the data publishing through the disclosure process and identify key issues of the concern. Gap in the data area of good practice. They should put technical jargon into the plain language, turning data into the compelled information. This allows social accountability stakeholders to easily understand the issue and hold decision maker to the account. For Thailand, we design university research team to be an assurance team, since they have various types of knowledge. For Cost Thailand, we assign assurance team to do site visit for selecting project. They will observe the construction site to compare data and information disclosed on our website to the actual state of the construction project. The assurance team also facilitates discussion with the procuring entity, relevant government agency, and citizens. It can create a safe space for the community to raise issues on how the project has affected their life. The Comptroller General Department and Assurance Team act as a mediator to resolve this issue. Lastly, about the social accountability, play as an important role in the ensuring key issue on the public infrastructure project inside the public domain. This should influence the public and hold decision maker to account. Cost Thailand encourage procuring entity to do public hearing to be ensure that their project can benefit to the community. And this slide, I will tell you about the output for we did for the cost. Cost develop a mechanism and standard for the disclosure of information, and also cost allow more information to be more accessible to the greater number of the people. Cost also help stakeholders to investigate the government closely. And also the construction project has committed to the joint cost program. So I think that in Thailand, we use cost to help to ensure the public money is spending effectively. This is going to be the output for we did for the cost. And this is just only simple picture that for the assurance team and our team from the Comptroller General Department to site visit to in another project. Did you see in this big picture? We combine the third party composed of the assurance team and also the government agency and citizens allowed in this area. This is an example for the project that we've been to. I think this picture is last year that the cost cost international go to Thailand and visit this area is we call the Ballwin project. This is a base, and this project can save the money about about 20% budget save for this project, about 20% when we do at the cost project. And this slide, I will show you for the statistic of cost of Thailand. From the first year, we have about 654 projects. This goes on the cost website. This number has rapid increase in 2018 when we include the project from the local authority. The first phase when we launch this program is we use just only the government, just only in the government agency. But right now, this project we use for the local authority. That's why you can see that they have a lot of projects right now, about 535 projects from the local authority and 112 from the central government agency and another 7 from the state-owned enterprise. The total number of the budget is around 80 billion baht. The calculated focal price is about 76 billion baht, and contract value is about 66 billion baht. We can see the contract value decrease is about almost 18% and from the budget, and also from the about 13% from the focal point. So it means that the impact of a digitized public procurement process, although we cannot conclude that the decrease in contract value in the sole impact of the cost also provides significant feature to the public to participate in the public construction procurement. And this slide, I will tell you a little bit about the future plan in Thailand. This slide is, I will tell you briefly that we will develop our new website that should be improved than last year. And the next part is about improve the public engagement. So it means that in Thailand, we will move and keep going on for the against corruption in Thailand. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that if you and another country have more questions, you can ask me by email or later. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Patraporn, for the very insightful presentation on the e-governance and also on the costs, which is by all means a very interesting program enhancing transparency in public procurement. So there will be a question and answer later, time later. So for now, I would like to give the floor to our next speaker, which is Mrs. Rowena Candice Ruiz. He's the Executive Director of the Government Procurement Policy Board of the Philippines. She's a lawyer and the former head of the legal service of the Department of Budget and Management, and she will describe her work at the Procurement Policy Board of the Philippines. Mrs. Rowena, are you here?
Hi, Francesco. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Do you hear me all right?
We hear you and we see you. Good to see you. Thank you for coming.
All right, great. So let me begin by showing you the Government Procurement Policy Board. The function of the board is the board that basically handles the procurement policy concerns in the Philippines. It's an interagency office composed of government agencies and a private sector representative. Its mandate is to implement the Government Procurement Reform Act, a single piece of legislation that provides the principles and procedure in government procurement covering all types of procurement, whether it be goods, infrastructure, projects, and consulting services. The GPPB, as I said, has three main functions: policy making, capacity development, and monitoring. And of course, through policy making authority, the board issues implementing rules to make government procurement agile and responsive, especially in the case that we have right now, in the case of the pandemic. I'm showing to you two other offices. Board. We have the Technical Support Office, where I belong. It's the office that provides policy recommendations to the board and implements the country's procurement capacity development program and oversees monitoring of the procurement system. The other office, separate from us, is the Philippine Government Electronic Procurement System, or PhilGEPS, which serves as the primary source of information on all government procurement in the Philippines and manages the country's electronic procurement system. For this afternoon, I'll be focusing more on the functions of the GPPB and the Technical Support Office and how we're doing the digital transformation. Now, it would be good also to understand and to know how much the Philippine government procures. Because public procurement is indeed a key economic driver in any country. It's also a proven strategic tool in the delivery of base towards the achievement of the country's national development goals. Now, for the period covering 2016 to 2019, procuring entities in the Philippines posted bid opportunities in the amount of roughly $169.49 billion, with an average of $42.36 billion every year. If all these bid opportunities resulted in an award of contract, this would translate to an average of 58.83% of our national budget. Now, let me go back. So, as I mentioned earlier, it's a very good amount of 12.36 of our gross domestic product, and more than half of our national budget which would have to undergo procurement. In COVID response in the Philippines, it actually included the passage of two legislations. First is Republic Act number 11469, or the Bayanihan to Heal as One Act. The other one is RA 11494, or the Bayanihan to Recover as One Act. Perhaps those not from the Philippines might be wondering why we're using Bayanihan, because it literally means being a bayan or a town, and is thus used to the spirit of communal unity and cooperation. So the passage of said laws carried with it the legal imprimatur to exempt procurement of COVID-19 related items from the application of our main procurement law, or RA 9184. Now, what the Philippine legal framework allows for emergency procurement in times of crisis. So as was saying earlier, I think we all know that the unprecedented disruption of the global supply chain and with the procuring entities urgently tasked in some cases for the very first time poses a huge risk in public procurement. We see procuring entities scramble to buy in large quantities in the fastest time possible, but with asymmetrical or limited market information. Emergency procurement in times of crisis inevitably opens door for inefficient acquisitions by people under severe time pressure. For some unintentionally, but others occurring as a result of corruption. It opens the possibility that in this procurement race, best value for money is sacrificed to the one fastest to provide. Now, obviously now more than ever, we need to build on the transparency institutions and mechanisms we already have for greater public transparency. Thus, transparency through open access to useful and understandable information, timely dissemination of procurement rules and procedure, as well as capacity building are all important. Transparency as a principle in government procurement should encompass the traditional avenues of posting and publication. It should be elevated towards knowledge sharing, inclusiveness, and greater sense of accountability. This is especially true in times of emergencies, as we cannot sacrifice transparency over expediency. Moreover, in the digital realm, innovation is vital in capturing and upscaling transparency and accountability through technology-enabled platforms, which are effective ways to combat corruption. Central to the success of the special emergency procurement rules in the Philippines under the Bayanihan Act is the establishment of the GPPB online portal. The GPPB online portal serves as an electronic transparency board for procurements conducted under the Bayanihan laws. Given the posting limitation of the existing PhilGEPs, we needed to provide the digital space for procuring entities to post all of their award by acts. contract and supplier details are likewise available online without need for registration. I wish to also add that the portal, which was launched only sometime in April, has been very effective. In fact, as far as I know, there was already one contract about several hundred millions of pesos worth was already canceled or terminated because it was posted in the portal, and some organizations questioned the awards given to that particular supplier. Now, indeed, public accountability can never be compromised over expediency, especially in times of crisis. By providing an open and inclusive digital space through the GPPB online portal, we were able to spot questionable procurement projects and call on procuring entities to account for their actions. Now, we should not end or stop with just having the portal. We should also look and explore into data analytics. So to complement the portal, we are currently finalizing the data analytics of the buying patterns of the government, both national and local, in response to the pandemic. Apart from that, we're still very much into exploring the digital platform. And so we ourselves develop what we call the GPPB online blacklisting portal. This is an in-house developed platform primarily to ensure timely, accurate, and complete information on blacklisted entities. The OBP, as we call it, has an automatic notification feature to PhilJeps, where suppliers are registered, of all blacklisted entities suspended by procuring entities. Signals to PhilJeps to cancel the registration of the blacklisted or debarred entities for the covered period. This will then prevent the award of contract by other procuring entities to the said blacklisted entities. And secondly, this is why the development of the OBP was accelerated. We wanted it to aid in the virtual conduct of post-qualification proceedings during this pandemic because of the health safety protocols being imposed all over the countries. Procuring entities and the public in general can now readily access the consolidated blacklisting report online through the GPPB website. We have shifted to digital learning with the conduct of and participation in over 30 online trainings and webinars with 5,000 procurement practitioners, suppliers, and CSO representatives as participants, and around 126,000 Facebook viewers. We were able to effectively disseminate the changes and enhancements implemented to assist procuring entities in their procurement activities. Now, leveraging technology to curb corruption is perhaps the simplest yet the most challenging avenue for governments. This is due mainly, at least in our case, to disintegration of data. We hope to embark on the procurement dashboard project. Using the procurement data submitted by pilot agencies covering 2018 and 2019, the GPPB Technical Support Office was able to generate data analytics of the buying patterns of agencies, volume and amounts of awarded contracts, average procurement periods, timelines, basic gender profile of procurement officers. We included the risk registry, level of compliance, and the overall procurement health of the procuring entity. The exercise was meant to of pilot agencies by providing them a usable set of data and the resulting procurement events that would correctly inform their future procurement plans and action. In addition, we are this year in the process of sharing the results of some data analytics we did for the current year through what we call the interim review of procurement performance result. This is a mid-year procurement diagnostics of the agency's procurement health. We soon realized that the manual records keeping and processing of documents force employees to physically report to work. Some of the institutional rules and regulations are likewise hinged on physical documents and handwritten signatures, which prove very difficult and in some cases extremely taxing under the new normal. Corrupt individuals will exploit this weakness and provide incentives for them to maintain the status quo with such offenses. Next slide. We certainly need to create an institutional memory through the use of technology. While we have laws on records archiving, the same is done manually. Procuring entities have taken the initiative to digitize, but without set standards and monitoring. We will be hard put ensuring complete, reliable, quality, and timely access to procurement data. Digitization and e-governance will address not only challenges under the new normal, but will provide the necessary foundation in the development of a structured data management system for all government procurement. Okay. Challenges moving forward. Well, we have inch much further than we have set ourselves to accomplish thus far. Much more are needed to sustain and achieve the reform initiatives we have set in place. And if we are serious in mitigating risk of fraud and corruption in public procurement, we need to institutionalize useful technological innovations towards this end. We cannot be contented with project-based solutions. We need to automate all procurement reports that will inform the procurement data analytics that we plan to publish in open source. This then presents the other challenges we face in capacitating our teams to ensure success. We need to transition and upskill not only our team, but the entire bureaucracy, and an effective change management team will make this daunting task manageable. But beyond competence, we also need to put enough attention in enhancing integrity, as this builds trust and confidence to the public procurement process. So in conclusion, we need to mine and explore all these technological innovations to mitigate the risk of fraud and corruption in public procurement. These are vital tools in capturing transparency and demanding accountability from the government, especially in times of a national health emergency, where expediency is the name of the game, where collusion and fraud in government procurement may thrive unaccounted, if not checked or monitored. Without these online portals, one would wait for weeks, months, and even years before getting the needed procurement data, delaying the course of an investigation, which may eventually impede the delivery of justice, and once again allowing impunity to gain its ground. This we cannot allow to permeate. We need to act now, and we need to act fast. So thank you for your attention. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Rowena, for your insightful and comprehensive presentation of the effort the Government Procurement Policy Board is making. I know myself it's a very interesting project, as we have done a little bit of work together this year. So thank you very much. Please stay here, because we are going to continue with our presentation, and then we're going to hopefully manage to have some questions. Now I'd like to go ahead with the presentations, and I would call upon our next speaker, which is Mr. Mohamad Hadiyana. He is the Deputy of Information and Data at the Indonesia Corruption Eradication Commission. He was previously the Director of Standardization of Postal and ICT Equipment at the Ministry of Communication and Information Technology of Indonesia. And he is going to speak about public data analytics conducted by the Corruption Eradication Commission in Indonesia. So I think your presentation is already on the screen. So Mr. Hadiyana, the floor is yours. Are you here?
Yes, thank you, Francesco.
Thanks.
Good morning or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor for me to be here. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar, Francesco. As you said, this time I will present KPK Big Data Analytics to detect corruption in government procurement in Indonesia. I will start my presentation by showing the background why we use data analytics. Okay, we live in an age of digital transformation now. Cellular telecommunication, cloud computing, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and other emerging technologies have produced a massive amount of data. Social networks grow rapidly and its number of users exploded. Converging technologies also have enabled always connected devices, producing torrents of a wide variety of data generated each and every second. Data itself is classified as structured and unstructured data, and each classification has bearing on how it is collected, processed, and analyzed. It is now possible to capture new ways to create value for an organization. To take advantage of new ways for creating value, organizations are focusing on the rapid growth of transformative technology and tools to analyze data sets. These techniques are commonly referred to as data analytics. Analytics is defined as the extensive use of data, statistical and quantitative analysis, explanatory and predictive models to drive decision and actions. And data analytic is the common practice of analyzing qualitative and quantitative data to extract useful information. Data analytic is a general term used for the current process of analyzing structured and unstructured data through a variety of techniques and processes. The purpose of data analytic is to identify hidden trends and patterns that provide useful information to decision makers. Data analytics therefore takes advantage of structured and unstructured data to make connections between individuals, groups, or organizations. As I said in the first slide, digital transformation is producing torrents of a wide variety of data. This large amount of data sets grows so fast and so large, too raw or too unstructured, that it is difficult or impossible to process using traditional methods. This is what we call, when we talk about big data, we are essentially talking about the complexity of big data, the volume, variety, and velocity. Volume is the quantitative makeup of big data and has been defined as data capacities from terabytes to petabytes. Variety defines the different types of data that are available through various sources and can be structured, unstructured, semi-structured, raw, or a combination of them. Velocity is the speed of the frequency at which data are being generated or delivered. It is processed, delivered, circulated, and produced for analytical purposes. We have the challenge not in obtaining data, but in the proper way of handling the many sources, formats, and types of data that are readily available. And veracity is the quality of big data, how accurate the big data, and how precise big data and trusted big data. Big data offers opportunities that can change the way we live our lives for the better. It allows organizations to understand the people they serve, choose better strategies, allocate their resources more effectively, and operate smarter. For an organization to be successful in taking advantage of big data, it must use data analytic. Analytic is the discovery, interpretation, and communication of meaningful patterns in data. It is the process to uncover hidden patterns, unknown correlation, and other useful information that can help organizations make more informed. Big data analytic involves the use of data science to extract knowledge or pattern from data. Data science is responsible for breaking down big data into useful information and creating software and algorithms that help organizations determine optimal operations. Data sets that once were too massive, varied, and complex can now be analyzed to yield analytical insight. There are many types of data analytics. The first one is descriptive analytics that are used to identify patterns through historical data to determine trends that are occurring or have occurred. This is the most commonly used and understood type of analytical process, using techniques such as regression and data modeling to reach outcomes. Through descriptive analysis, data become categorized, classified, and consolidated. Descriptive analytics focus on providing insight into past, real-time, and structured data. The second one is predictive analytics. It focuses on future events and require higher level and more defined use of analytic capabilities. With predictive analytics, data are analyzed to find relationships not immediately apparent, identifying trends or probability of an event that might occur. Predictive analytics allows for big data to be scrutinized between present and past trends to predict future occurrences. Predictive analytics should be applied in real time and infer existing relationship into the future. Some methods of predictive analytics include data mining, forecasting, root cause analysis, pattern recognition, and predictive modeling. The next type of data analytics is prescriptive analytics that is applied to increase the chance of producing the best possible outcome once past data are already known and understood. With prescriptive analytics, the goal is to enact the action necessary to produce the highest yielding results. Prescriptive analytics are based on the concept of optimization and are implemented through simulation techniques. An example of prescriptive analytics is the ability of the internet to recommend certain product or items to user based on previous choices. Other type of data analytic is what we call distributional analytic. It is used to detect anomalies within data. Through the use of distributional analytic, patterns can be detected and outliers can be observed. These outliers are known as anomalies and can be a detection of either something being wrong within the system or illicit activity occurring within an organization. And also there is a linkage analytic, which is a link analysis that use statistics to determine the probability of relationship among different entities. Analytical insight of a large amount of unstructured content such as blogs, video services, social networks, discussion forums, review sites, etc. enables an organization to make informed decisions. An example of social network analysis occurs when Facebook is used to track potentially inappropriate relationship, such as those between government contracting employees and contractors with whom they are negotiating a contract. Okay, that's data analytic at a glance. We have implemented data analytic in the case, in this case, descriptive analytic and linkage analytic since 2019 in our KPK Big Data to detect corruption in public procurement in Indonesia, because corruption in procurement is the second largest type of corruption in Indonesia now. For your information, public procurement in Indonesia is carried out in a decentralized
Sorry, you have been muted. Can you unmute yourself? Your microphone is muted. Thank you. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, now I hear you.
Okay. We will continue. For your information, public procurement in Indonesia is carried out in a decentralized manner. Each government institution, both at the central and the regional levels, has a special unit which has a task to organize procurement, both electronically and manually. National Public Procurement Agency, or LKPP, in 2008 has created a single national e-portal which is called INAPROC, which gathers information on procurement announcements from numerous electronic portals of the different central and local procuring entities. The process of electronic procurement starts with the demand of the users or procurers in each ministry, organization, and local government to each procurement service unit, which is called ULP, to procure a certain good or service or work. The ULP then will input the data related with the good service procurement to the electronic bidding system, which is called SPSE, which is integrated with the electronic procurement service host, or LPSE, in each ministry, organization, and local government. LPSE shows information on individual tenders up until the signing of the contract. Additionally, another important portal is the SIRUP, which stores information on public procurement annual plans. In total, there are over 25 portals or applications dedicated to different phases of public procurement process. All of these portals or application can be found on the website of LKPP. LKPP is the main body responsible for preparation and formulation of strategies in the area of public procurement, as well as determining policy and procedure or standards. Duties of the LKPP is monitoring and evaluating the implementation of public procurement rules, guiding and developing information systems, and supervise the implementation of electronic procurement, and providing technical guidance, advocacy, and legal assistance. LKPP is not an independent agency, since in carrying out its duties and function, it is subordinate to the State Minister of National Development Planning and is accountable directly to the President. The implementation of a procurement process empirically will prevent and reduce the procurement fraud. But in fact, the procurement fraud is still high. Seems like the procurement management system is unemployed. Many cases of corruption have taken place in the procurement process. Corruption in procurement is the second largest type of corruption in Indonesia. Thus, KPK developing big data analytics with the intention, among others, to prevent and to detect corruption in procurement processes. We need data for our big data analytics. The data comes from Syrup, an application containing information concerning procurement planning, tender methods, tender categories, and tender schedules made by executing official or PPK, tender committees, and tender participants. The data includes tender package, proposal, companies, and contract. We also need data of company profile, civil registration, and others, and such data are available in LPSE. Indonesia public procurement process is generally categorized into 4 distinctive phases: procurement planning, procurement preparation, selection preparation, and selection process. Within each of these 4 phases, there are several associated activities that provide opportunities for the perpetrators of procurement fraud. Procurement planning is the initial phase in the public procurement process and is intended to identify which government agency requirements can be best met by procuring product or services from sources outside outside the agency, the government agency. Procurement planning begins with the identification of the agency's requirement. In developing the procurement plan, the agency should form a team consisting of all the key personnel responsible for significant aspect of the acquisition. During this activity, procurement method fraud scheme involves developing method which is different from procurement planning that target a specific favored bidder with the intent of directing contract to that bidder. Other fraud scheme associated with budget sharing and schedule in procurement planning and also with the selection method. The second phase of the procurement process establishes owner estimates. During this activity, procurement fraud associated with owner estimates that close to budget sharing and also have a pattern. The third phase is selection preparation. In this phase, tender committee will determine procurement method. They are selection method, qualification method, document submission method, evaluation method, and scheduling. During this activity, procurement fraud associated with the mismatch of the methods and schedules. And the last phase is selection process. In this phase, there is pre-bid meetings, announcement of requirements, evaluation of proposal, and exchanges with potential participants or bidder. There are fraud associating with bid price proposal, participants, and tender result. In the procurement, bid rigging or conspiracy is fraud that involves obstructing the valued competitive bidding process of full and open competition, which is required in order to obtain the best goods and services at the lowest prices for government. The process breaks down when competitors collude and inflate prices to cheat the customer. Intentionally restricting competition through artificially implanted prices involves an arrangement between competitors to limit competition by agreeing in advance who will submit the winning bid. The purchasers trust that the market competition will produce the lowest price, but instead is forced to accept a lowest bid that is higher than the competitive market would normally generate. There is particularly
1 minute left.
Okay. Particularly conspiracy between tender participant and tender committee or government official, and horizontal conspiracy among participants. Vertical conspiracy may occur when tender committee announce tender in very limited time and the number of tender participants less than usual. Horizontal conspiracy may occur when tender participants submit almost the same bid price. And this to detect fraud in procurement, we established big data infrastructure in 2019. This is the data management flow in our big data analytics. And this is the higher level analytic model of our big data. This is application logical architecture of our big data. Once this big data infrastructure established and analytics program that encompasses rule-based predictive and linkage analytics is utilized to detect procurement fraud. We use Presidential Regulation number 16 of year 2018 concerning government good and service procurement as a basis for determining red flag in procurement processes. We use descriptive analytic method and association rule mining to detect pattern and fraud per tender, fraud per committee, and LPSE, fraud per tender participant, and bid rigging. And this is the visualization of our big data to detect fraud. There is visualization of fraud indicator, the detail of procurement fraud, and conspiracy, also collection. There is tender visualization geographically. The list of the winner is of tender, and also there is earning of each winner. In procurement fraud dashboard, we can see procurement fraud percentage for each phase of procurement, number of procurement fraud, and the distribution of fraud in terms of number of red flag. In tender party, okay. In tender participants dashboard, we can see the list or the rank of participants who register to tender but do not win tender. And also there is the list of the rank of participants proposing bid price but do not win tender, and the list or the rank of the winners. In tender committee dashboard, we can see the distribution of the age of the committee members, the top 10 committee having the most fraud, and also the top 10 LPS with the most fraud, and the table of the name of committee member. We analyze the result of our procurement big data analytics to find out the corruption aspect of the red flag. These analytic tools must also have a human element that can interpret if the information provided from the program shows reason for additional evaluation. Criminals will find a way to manipulate the system and alter their illicit behavior to avoid detection. So we must evaluate the result of our big data. The result is then feed to prevention division to prevent procurement fraud with the same fraud patterns to occur, or to recommend procurement management system improvement to LKPP. The result also fed to law enforcement division exporting evidence for corruption cases in procurement, and also to recommend law enforcement division to investigate at LPSE tender participants who have high fraud indicator or red flag. That's all my presentation, Francesco. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mochamat. Very, very comprehensive and interesting to see the type of analysis that you managed to produce thanks to this data. So stay there. Again, we will try to get some questions at the end. Now, our last speaker of the day is Mr. Khairil Yusuf. He is the co-founder and coordinator of the CINAR project, an award-winning civic tech organization based in Malaysia that pioneers innovative approach to transparency, open data, and anti-corruption. So, dear Khairil, if you are here, show us your presentation so that.
So, right, should be working.
And you can turn on your camera as well. So.
Okay. Right.
We see you too.
Okay, so I hope you can see my presentation right now.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So yeah, thank you for UNODC, the UK government, GDS, open ownership. I think we've been working with some of partners for some time. It's been quite a journey. So for those of you, we're close to coming up to 3 hours, so bear with me. I'll try to speed it up so we can have a longer Q&A session. So basically, the session's on national perspectives, but for me, just to be clear, I'm more on a civil society and media perspective and not so much on the government side for Malaysia here. So what I'm going to be working on is more on, using data analytics, but in constrained environments. And this can be either politically or, technical restrictions. I'm kind of going to skip this because the other speakers have already covered this topic. If you have data, there's all sorts of cool, algorithms, and if they're in standardized data, we can kind of reuse these methods easily. So the OCDS red flags is a really good manual for that already for contracting. You can do these sort of things where you say it's like, okay, projects that are awarded with companies with no track records and a whole host of other algorithms that have already been developed by a lot of different partners. So yeah, with I think UK GDS has also covered this, and I think this is currently being worked on Bluetail. We also had this idea around 2016 where there's limits to what you can do with just one set of data. While you can do an amazing amount of data analysis on fraud and so on with just contracts, quite often when you want to deal with corruption, we need a little bit more data beyond just the contracts itself to be able to detect, for example, conflicts of interest, or quite often when their conflicts of interest are not direct, you also need data, not just beneficial ownership, but the relationships, the positions those people hold, and so on, to detect more complicated forms of fraud when it's not just directly in the data itself. So it's pretty amazing that so this idea that we had before now is being implemented in Bluetail. So I really love to actually see that happening, which is really good. So yeah, those examples were already there before. But the area of work that CINAR works in, as civil society, we're on the outside looking in. So our challenge often is that we don't have the kind of data access that government and enforcement agencies have. So we often have to work in this environment of the challenge where there's either incomplete or poor data. So one of the things that we've been working on, I think since 2015, so about more than 5 years now, is the fact that even if you don't have enough data, even if you have difficulty in terms of the quality of data that you have access to, you're able to, it does not mean that you're not able to do, data analytics. It does not mean that you're not able to take advantage of all the amazing things that the previous speakers have talked about, in terms of implementing open contracting and so on. So the approach in using it as civil society and as media, for example, is that these open data standards that are being developed are actually enablers for us in more constrained environments to actually do data analytics with limited capacity or limited data. So I often do a quick, example of why open data standards help us in terms of understanding. So quite often, as our colleague from Indonesia just shared, you either have incomplete pieces of information when you're doing this, or sometimes you have way too much data, and then you need to have it in a sort of structured format. So if one of the things with open data standards is that it provides a good structure for us to put things together. So for journalists, for example, and I'll cover these things in a bit later, it allows us to build applications with incomplete data. It allows us to understand what pieces that we still need to find. And then for journalists, it provides us a guide on what to ask in terms of questions. It's like, hey, I see 2 pieces here, but we're missing 1. Can you please provide 1, in terms of questions? And I'll show a little bit how open data standards help. So if you actually have all the pieces together, things are cleared. So I think it's okay for me to use this picture now because he's a convicted felon now in Malaysia. So one of the things in constrained environment is data is really hard to obtain. And it's in pieces, and you need multiple sources. I think open ownership covered this earlier. These things change all the time. So a good example, also when we start doing these data analytics, people do catch on. So sometimes data starts disappearing. People start hiding their beneficial ownerships in even more complicated structures, holding companies and whatnot. And quite often when corruption cases or certain investigations start becoming public or being more aware, or they feel that enforcement agencies are getting close, data starts disappearing really fast. The provincial shredding the paper really quickly. So here's a quick example is that, in 2012, we could find, this politically exposed person, but with the same set of data or even larger set of data for construction industry, a lot of the PEPs that we had match in older 2012 data are no longer listed as beneficial ownership. So this is where you can have more data and things disappear. The other problem that we have dealing with politically exposed persons is that positions are not tracked when there's changes in government, or even when, as I mentioned, if a corruption issue starts happening or being suspected, people stick quickly, either as in the open ownership, quickly start divesting their ownership, or they change positions and whatnot. So this is just one example of where positions in government agencies quickly change, and quite often this data is not tracked. So we might have the PEPs of the person in the department or agency now, but we're no longer tracking who was that person last year or a few years before. So this data needs to be tracked. So this example, I just shared that, within a year or so, because of a change, we lost some data on, for the directors of the beneficial owners of a private company used to raise fraudulent funds for 1MDB. So I had to capture that. So when I'm talking about limited capacity, you know, especially from civil society and media, we are talking about limited resources. You're also limited in terms of technical, and then sometimes we also have limited technical capacity, not in terms of just the tech part, but even like the specialization or the knowledge on certain topics. And quite often, and I'm happy to hear that there's a shift. This is that quite often the focus is just on publishing data. And the problem with this, as I've shared, is problematic because you're depending on just a single source, such as the government, which may or may not provide the data that you need, or it may be incomplete. So one of the things that has changed beyond just using open data standards as a structure is that it can make complex domain-specific issues accessible to people who are not experts in the field. So I'll give an example is on costs, which has been mentioned multiple times. Infrastructure is a very complicated topic. Few of us who are not procurement experts in infrastructure or engineers, it's very hard for us to do oversight or even to review data without some guidance. So costs is a perfect example where a data standard provides some baseline fields about a project that we should have. So at the minimal level, for example, even if I'm not familiar with an infrastructure project, I can ask, and I'll be able to ask and say, it's like, okay, for a project, we should have a name, we should have a environmental impact assessment report. We'd like to have the funding sources. Can you provide that? So it provides, a bare minimum standards of what proper transparency or quality data needed for a project needs to be done for infrastructure. So I'll just skip this because there's a whole lot. And the same goes with OCDS. What's the minimum standard for OCDS that allows us to do some of those data analysis that we mentioned before, or a minimum amount of transparency that's needed to understand these things? The other advantage in using kind of these open data standards is that it creates a common language so that, for example, and I think Ben shared some of a more detailed sheet, it allows people to look at the same, the different types of problems and understand where the problem is and know, share common language. It's like, okay, I found that this person receives multiple contracts. What stage in the procurement process should I be in? Oh, okay, it's in the contracting stage. And now you can ask for information from that area. So this allows, different actors from looking at different things to be able to have a common framework to discuss and investigate or share data on what they need for investigations. The other thing and shares that, in terms of reducing or making these sort of technical standards more accessible, is that when open data standards are created, usually for publication standards, it's usually a little bit complicated for most people to use. This is how you should process it and so on. And a lot of this work is really, really important because you need this data in this form in order to do all those sort of analysis and so on to make sure that it's quality. One of the things that I've been working on mostly is that the fact that you can, and that was great. So I saw, I think, what's it called, the Silver Eye by UKGDS. It's great to see other people seeing this as well, in the sense that these sort of standards can simplify how we add data or create data when there's limited amounts of data. So an example here is for open ownership. So as a journalist, for example, or as an investigator, I'm not an expert in all the different ways and methods of control, all the different use cases that open ownership has studied. However, if I have a tool that uses this standard, then I'm already being guided in terms of, how do I categorize it correctly, or even in this case, asking or understanding better what kind of different kind of ownership controls that I could have, right? So in this case, it's like, okay, is this senior managing official? settle of trust, I don't even know what that is, but now I can start ask those sort of questions. So it makes it a little bit more accessible for me. So one of the, and I've shared this before, is that when you build on this, you have an extensive work on multiple use cases. So even with a small set of data that you have, you know that it's in a standard that's usable or has been usable to do a lot of those things that the previous speakers have shared. Like, I want to have this tool, or I want to put it in Bluetail to do comparison between PEPs and contracts. So even if you have incomplete data, you know that whatever you're finding is going to be usable in a lot of different ways that maybe you haven't thought about yet, simply by just following the standard when filling the data in. So an example for this is that that I found with open ownership, for example, is that I have a standard called Popula, which tracks basic positions of people and persons in government. But that standard didn't have details, for example, on PEPs fields, which open ownership has, which I could then extend, and now I get all the benefits by using open ownership. For all the reasons why open ownership had that in there. So there must be a good reason for it. And I actually found that was pretty interesting because some of those fields were extremely useful that I didn't think about. For example, it's like what tax residencies the person was, or whether a person even has multiple nationalities, which is pretty useful when you start tracking offshore and cross-border money laundering cases. So the other part about making this accessible, before I kind of wrap up my talks, is that when you make these open data standards accessible by more contributors, you might have more limited data, but the contributions have a higher quality because you're adding signals from a more diverse group of people, right? So I'll just give an example of this. So this is a timeline of data collected for 1MDB. And this timeline of data includes specific data collected by journalists, either in their day-to-day reporting, whether it's investigations, whether it's industry specific, such as construction or property development and so on. So when they report this, they're already kind of collecting and just the key information, for example, for a court case that you need to do it. So even though it's one small article, and I'll show a little bit later how valuable this data is, that those 545 pieces are just they're already being signaled by these journalists that saying, this piece of data is newsworthy or important. And similar thing happens to enforcement agencies, audit agencies. I love the Malaysian audit agency. They're up to the stage now where they literally bold key phrases in the audit of things that they find to make it easier. So again, if I add that data in, it's a signal by the audit agency that piece of information is important, even though I, as a layperson, may not exactly know what the significance of it is. Similarly for parliamentary committees, and you can extend this because they're open standards, local and foreign as well. So yeah, this is just a quick example of how you can kind of extract key data or structures from different things and put it into open data standards. So here's an example of doing the same thing, but for journalists. If you have questions later, I think you can see the slides, but I'm not going to go through it, but the idea is there. So for this media work that I worked in Kenya, using the same standards and platform as I did in Malaysia, we had the same things. So in terms of media, when they're doing coverage on corruption issues, they've already extracted the key beneficial ownership that's important, and as well as the key people involved. So you don't need to sift through 50 different files, for example. The investigative journalists have already kind of sifted through and published the key data, and not only that, have also verified it according to the editorial standards. So again, if they've gone through and added this. So the reason I'm saying that limited data is not a barrier. Even with, I think I've got about 400 people or so, I probably have about 1,200 different types of relationships. So I wanted to do it dynamically, but just to show. So for example, for Jolo, which is a person involved in the 1MDB scandal in Malaysia, he was the beneficial ownership of one company, but from the relationships that I've added through all those reporting and so on, we're able to do a lot more extensive things on all the different relationships of the people involved to it, either visually or you can do it mathematically, as our colleague from Indonesia has said. It's a similar thing happened in Kenya, for example. From just about 9 stories, like short news clippings, we were able to map out just from the data that we captured in those 9 stories, using the open data standards that I've just shared, the complex web of all the different people involved in betting licenses, in terms of political financing, and in terms of, in this case, I think some issues around COVID-19 procurement. So if you follow these standards, if you have limited data, you can still do these analytics because just before I wrap up, the standards have already covered a whole range of cases. And if you decrease the barrier, you get people who put in data that is high quality because of different signals. And with a limited set of data, you can do quite a lot of relationships. So before I end this, and I'm going to wrap it up now. The biggest challenge I have now is basically ending impunity. We can kind of detect fraud now, but what's the next challenge now is how can we help use this data for prosecutors or even for civil society suits to actually use it in a criminal case so that we can actually bring these people to justice and not just highlight the fraud. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kirill. Also a very interesting presentation and impressive work from you with, as you say, the limited data sets you can access from your position. So we have heard from 4 distinguished speakers from Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, and Malaysia. Interesting experiences. I would like to see if there is some question from the floor. I realize we have been in this webinar for quite some time. There was an observation before about the politically exposed person, and I think the observation was that the data has to be available for anti-corruption agencies on politically exposed person from various sources at the international level. I think, Kirill, you already mentioned this, but maybe if the other speaker, Mrs. Ruina, Mrs. Patrapor, and Mr. Mochamad, if they are online, if they can, if they want to share maybe their perspective on how to identify politically exposed persons, and if they have difficulties with this. I'm not sure if anybody would like to take the question. Okay, maybe Kirill, you start. And,
so, I mean, that was a really good, I think, question raised on the availability of PEPs. So actually, this is the problem that we've been facing. So as a result, we actually had to build our own database. I think 2 of the things, going on my talk that, so there's actually 2 open data standards that we could actually use to make this list of PEPs. One is popular spec, extended with the open ownership PEPs fields. And if we make this publish all the PEPs data from different countries in this standard format. It'll make this kind of import into one single database much easier, as well as complete.
Absolutely. Is there any other question or remark at this point? I don't see any hands up. I think.
Yes, Francesco.
Yes,
if I may
please,
just perhaps contribute. For politically exposed person in the Philippines, we do have another office. That's the Anti-Money Laundering Council of the Philippines that actually deals with this. Right now, I'm not particularly aware of any specific project they have, but certainly this is something that with respect to money laundering, that's something that relates to. With respect to public procurement, which my office is dealing with, what we're doing right now is really engaging with the Securities and Exchange Commission. That's the regulatory office in the Philippines that deals with registration of companies, because we really are looking into how technology would help us identify business ownership and business interest in relation to conflict of interest, in relation to identifying, for instance, if a listed entity has just created another company rather, to be able to participate in public bidding and things like that. So just to add it to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Rowena. Interesting, of course, cooperation with the Security Exchange Commission and the Anti-Money Laundering Office from your part for the identification of politically exposed persons. Maybe Mr. Monchamadi would like to add something. See you.
Yes. Concerning politically exposed personnel, actually KPK has also developed big data for profiling. For your information, that every government officials and also politicians are obliged to submit reports concerning their wealth every year, and this information is collected in the big data, and it will be enriched by other data from other institutions, for example, from PPATK. Do you know PPATK? It is, yeah, I don't know in English, but such information will be useful to identify highly politically exposed personnel.
PPATK, I think, is the financial intelligence, right?
Yes, yeah, right.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, of course, anti-money laundering offices normally should be able to collect a certain number of information on politically exposed person. Also because banks, financial institutions in general, are also required to collect this information and then share the information with the financial intelligence unit if there is, if a bank account is opened by a politically exposed person, or transfer of large funds, amount of funds is performed by a politically exposed person. I see, Karil, there is in the chat line another question for you, so you would like to take it?
Hi, Mark. So on mapping government suppliers to department, in terms of companies, usually companies are there listed. Quite often you can find the beneficial owners of the company. So the limitation for that I found in mapping companies for conflicts of interest is how extensive is your PEPs database, and whether you have issues on whether your country has laws on ultimate beneficial ownership. So as I shared in my example before, we found a lot of hits in 2012, and then people just got smarter. So you'll have holding companies. Then you'll have your brothers and sisters and your lawyers holding those companies. So when you want to try to, when you want to have conflict of interest, it's how extensive is your PEPs database and the relationships you have in there to do the matching for the companies. So it's easier as at the start, but then it gets more completed as you go along. So yeah, so the limit for there is not so much the companies, but how big or extensive is your PEPs database.
Excuse me, I would like to answer that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm from Thailand again. I would like to answer for this question that about the in Thailand for the political should be declare on the declare the asset and all the budget that belong to the political. It should be disclosed at the National Anti-Corruption Commission. This is a right law. This is a act in Thailand. When the ministry or the political is come in, it should be declared on the budget, declare on the asset. This is a law in Thailand. You can find at the website. You can search by his name, or if you know that the ID number, and put it on at the on the National Anti-Corruption Commission website. This is a riot act in Thailand. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Patrapon. Also in Thailand, you have the asset declaration system, right, that allows you to check on asset of politically exposed persons as well, and confiscate assets if there is some unexplained wealth. Okay. Thank you very much. For 3 hours discussion. I would like to thank again all the speakers, the presenters, Warren, Bernardine, Tom, Mrs. Patrapon, Mrs. Rowena, Mrs. Mohammad, and Kirill for your very insightful presentations. This is not the last of the webinars. We are going to follow up with another one next year on health and health services and corruption. So stay tuned. We're gonna send you information on this other initiatives from our side. So again, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and good to see you, and have a good fight against corruption.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you very much.